Hot Momosa, a mafia romantic comedy. Bourbon Street Bad Boys Club, Book 4. Written by Kathryn M. Hearst. Narrated by Ava Lucas and Aaron Shedlock. Chapter 1. Leo. Good Catholics had kids. Loads of them. Heck, going forth and repopulating the earth was practically a commandment. Unfortunately, the priests never mentioned how to survive a legion of munchkins, armed with sippy cups and Legos. Kids ranging in age from 2 months to 17 years had invaded my parents' backyard. While I loved my nieces and nephews, swimming in the sea of munchkins made me miss another little boy. A little boy with my eyes who would likely never meet this half of his family. Some uncle you are, late for my son's first birthday. Gabe handed me a beer and a multicolored hat. I took the bottle and ignored the ridiculous cone-shaped monstrosity. I got hung up at the hotel. I'd spent hours going over the financials, dealing with pool maintenance, and approving the new marketing campaign. It was hell, but the place was mine, free and clear. You know what they say about all work and no play? He chuckled, but it ended with a sigh. How's business going? Can't complain. Both the hotel and the restaurant turned a sizable profit last quarter. Thanks in no small part to me working my ass off 24/7. Good. My bar is finally above water, and hear Enzo tell it, business has never been better at his restaurant. I glanced at our younger brother Marco and his new baby. 12 months ago, he'd pulled the intellectual equivalent of a ninja move and freed us from the Sicilian mafia. Marco himself hadn't been so lucky. Not only had he been forced to stay in the mob, he'd ended up taking the position as capo of the Marchionni family. Regardless of his fate, I had a hard time feeling sorry for him. As a member of the Fratellanza, or ruling body of the Cosa Nostra, he had power, more money than God, and because he was a lucky SOB, a gorgeous wife and newborn daughter. Life might have handed him lemons, but he carved out the seeds and planted an entire fucking orchard. As for the rest of us, we were adjusting. Gabe clamped a hand on my shoulder and nodded toward the festivities. It's hard to believe Rocco's already a year old. No kidding. I hadn't spent nearly enough time with the little guy, or any of my nieces and nephews, but I had my reasons for keeping my distance. Reasons like they reminded me of my biggest mistake and deepest regret. As if he'd read my mind, Gabe asked, "Seen Dahlia lately?" Not since she started dating that jackass. I downed half my beer and walked outside. It wasn't that I didn't want to talk to Gabe. Not precisely. He'd always been more like a best friend than a brother. For years, we'd been inseparable, but our lives had gone in two completely different directions. Gabe and Maggie were the freaking picture of domestic bliss. They had the white picket fence, the dog, and 5 kids, including the 3 they'd inherited when our oldest brother Joe had been murdered. On the other hand, the love of my life was dating a douchebag politician and raising my secret baby on her own. Sure, Dahlia and I had agreed to keep our son's paternity quiet for his safety, but things had changed. Hell, everything changed the day I walked away from the mob. Gabe followed me to the kid-friendly buffet. Then it won't interest you to know she's going to be here today. My pulse raced as if he'd slammed a syringe of adrenaline into my chest. I turned from the mac and cheese and chicken nuggets and stared. Dahlia is coming here. Maggie spoke to her this morning. He scratched his jaw, a sure sign he had more to say that I wouldn't like. She's bringing a +1. A +1. I hadn't met Dahlia's new man, but I'd seen pictures of them together online, on the news, and splashed across the tabloids in the supermarket checkout lane. The guy looked like a politician Ken doll, only with less personality. For the life of me, I couldn't understand the media's fascination with a presidential candidate's daughter and a state senator. Then again, how many politicians had daughters who looked like Dahlia? Why on earth would she bring Harrison fucking Merriweather to the party? It made 0 sense. She had to know I'd be here. Unless her +1 was a 2.5-year-old who looked a lot like me. Fuck, that's worse. Ma will lose her shit. And she's not the only one. As much as I wanted the world to know Gunnar was my son, this wasn't the time to spring it on my family. Dahlia and I had made a career out of convincing everyone, including my family, we were just friends, best friends, and strictly platonic. Coming clean about years of lies wasn't a rip the Band-Aid off kind of thing. It'd take time and planning. Gabe waved his hand in front of my face. Are you okay, man? Starved, but I can't stomach eating off the kiddie menu. What the hell were you guys thinking, serving this crap? My voice came out louder and sharper than I'd intended, so much so, people glanced in our direction. He nodded toward a second food table piled high with swanky, grown-up alternatives to the kids' food. Lobster mac and cheese replaced the orange, goo-covered shells, and there were pecan-crusted chicken breasts with apricot sauce instead of nuggets. In addition to the frou-frou items, our mother had prepared several traditional Sicilian dishes, including my favorite, shushedu. The mere sight of the little meatballs made my mouth water. Biting back a sigh, I said, Sorry I snapped. Yeah, well, it's hard to see what's in front of you when your head's up your ass. Gabe folded his arms. And I'm not talking about the menu. Let it go. I strode across the lawn to the adult buffet and loaded my plate. With any luck, I'd scarf down my food, kiss the birthday boy, and get the hell out of there before Dahlia and whoever the hell she was bringing showed up. Never one to take a hint, Gabe followed me. It's been a year, Leo. I'm aware. I glanced down at my lunch and wondered where my appetite had gone. 10 seconds before, my stomach had growled loud enough to wake the dead. Leaning close, he whispered, Talk to her. You two belong together. Did you miss the part where she's seeing someone else? I marched back into the house and unceremoniously dumped my plate in the kitchen trash can. A female gasped behind me. Leo? My name on Dahlia's lips made my heart lurch, as if it planned to burst out of my back like the alien in a Sigourney Weaver movie. I turned and forced my voice to remain neutral. Dahlia. I'd grown so used to seeing photos of her in business suits with her hair pulled back, I'd almost forgotten how stunning she looked in normal clothes. Her skinny jeans showed off her mile-long legs, and the fitted t-shirt hugged her chest. She wore her jet-black hair down and hadn't bothered with makeup, exactly the way I liked her, or used to like her. It's been forever. Dahlia glanced away. My God, I've missed her. Almost a year. I shoved my hands in my pockets to keep from grabbing her and begging for a second chance like a middle schooler with his first crush. Then again, Dahlia had been the first and only woman I'd ever loved. As in, I'd fallen ass over tea kettle for her. Yeah, she swallowed hard. How have you been? Busy with work. I rested my hip against the kitchen counter. How are things going with your father's campaign? Chaotic. Dahlia tilted her head and stared as if I'd spoken in another language. In a way, I guess I had. We'd never been the type of couple to waste time with small talk. Is this the new us? Is this how it's going to be? Chit-chat with me while she has real conversations with the other guy? She glanced around as if searching for something to say or maybe an escape route. How's your dad doing? Did he fly in from Sicily? He's hanging in there, but his doctors didn't think it was a good idea for him to travel. My chest ached like it did every time someone mentioned my father's health. Dahlia nodded and dipped her chin. It had been 2 years since he'd been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and 18 months since he'd made the decision to stop treatment. No one had expected him to live as long as he had, but he'd made a career out of proving people wrong. Time to change the subject. It struck me as odd that she was alone. Call me curious or masochistic, but I had to ask. Did you bring Harrison? No. She sighed and opened her mouth as if to say more, but I cut her off. When Gabe told me you had a +1, I thought it was either Senator Kendall or Gunner. My vote was for the kid. She shook her head so quickly I worried she'd pulled a muscle. Harrison had last-minute plans, and you know it's not a good idea to bring Gunner here. I held up my hands. I know. He looks too much like me, I get it. But you can't hide him from your friends forever. I don't know how you've managed to pull it off this long. It hasn't been easy, especially now that everyone is married and/or having babies. Dahlia stared out the patio doors, which is one of the reasons I'm moving to Baton Rouge. The news hit me like a right hook to the jaw. On the surface, it made sense. Dahlia's father was in an all-out battle to win the Democratic nomination for the presidency. She'd spent the past few months working on his election campaign. However, I knew her family's deepest, darkest secrets. Governor Dahlia Calhoun might have been a great guy, but he and the First Lady of Louisiana absolutely hated each other. Dahlia had always sworn she'd never move home and expose our son to her parents arguing. I studied her body language but couldn't get a read on what was going on in her head. Not with your parents, right? No, she sighed. I'm looking at condos on the other side of town. Somehow that didn't make me feel any better. I still hated the idea. I want to see Gunner before you move. She frowned. Why now, after all this time? Because he's my son, and I love you both. A son you haven't spent time with in almost a year. She rested her hands on her hips. Though misguided, I understood her skepticism. As far as she knew, I hadn't visited Gunner since I'd returned from Sicily 13 months prior. What she didn't know was that I'd bribed his nanny to bring him to my place damn near every day. Dahlia moving to Baton Rouge would make seeing him difficult, to say the least. About that, I couldn't bring myself to look her in the eye. I'm a moron. When I'd sworn the nanny to secrecy, I thought I was doing the right thing for Dahlia. However, I'd overlooked a few crucial flaws in my plan. First off, I never should have snuck around behind her back. Second, by doing so, I'd led her to believe I was a shitty father. And last, but certainly not least, standing in the same room with her made it impossible for me to lie to myself about my motives. I'd been avoiding her. Call me a coward, but I couldn't stand seeing her happy and knowing another guy had put the smile on her face. That was my job, damn it. She must have noticed the debate going on inside me because she narrowed her eyes. What is it? I had to tell Dahlia the truth, even if it meant she went ballistic. I'd endure anything as long as she didn't think of me as a deadbeat dad. Running my hand over the back of my neck, I said, It hasn't been that long since I've seen Gunner. I don't understand. Bracing myself for impact, I said, I've spent quite a bit of time with him over the last year. Dahlia flashed me a smile and shook her head. Is that why the nanny insists on taking him out every day at 2 o'clock, rain or shine? They were with you? Her reaction shocked the shit out of me, but then again, Dahlia had never been predictable. Guilty as charged. She laughed, and my cold black heart softened. The urge to touch her overwhelmed me, but I kept my distance. You're not mad? Actually, I'm relieved. I thought you didn't want to see him. Her smile wilted. You could have told me. I would have brought him to you. A surge of panic ran through me. I needed to take charge of the conversation before it went completely off the rails. I shouldn't have snuck around. Her eyes widened. You did it because you didn't want to see me. The pain in her voice cut me to the core. I sucked in a breath and chose my words very carefully. You're dating someone. I was giving you space. Her mouth fell open. Space? What gave you the idea I wanted space? Why the hell is she surprised? The night of Marco's wedding, you told me you were dating Harrison. No, I told you my father... She held up her hands and turned her head. You know what? It doesn't matter. All of this is in the past where it belongs. As for Gunner, I promised I'd never keep him from you. And I'll do my best to make sure that doesn't happen. But... here it comes. The reason she's going to break her promise. But... she raised her chin. I have to make this move. Things are complicated. Complicated how? So help me God, if she's doing this to be closer to that douchebag. There you are. My sister-in-law Maggie burst into the room and hugged Dahlia. Shauna and I were starting to think you'd chickened out. Dahlia's cheeks turned red as she pulled out of the embrace. I've been here for a few minutes. Leo and I were talking. Maggie glanced in my direction and paled. The slow-motion, wide-eyed head turn belonged in a horror movie, and was 100% out of character for Gabe's woman. She was raising 5 kids, for fuck's sake. She sure as hell didn't scare that easy. I didn't need a degree in female psychology to put 2 and 2 together and come up with the fact that their conversation had something to do with me. Yeah, dipshit. She came to tell you she was moving. I'll just... Maggie motioned to the patio. Leave you two alone to talk. Before either of us could respond, Gabe came through the door holding Rocco at arm's length. Incoming. Biohazard, baby. It's your turn, Mags. Seriously? It's been my turn since you started eating broccoli like it was candy. What can I say? You have a stronger stomach than I do. Gabe winked at his wife and turned to Dahlia. Glad you made it. Sorry I'm late. Something came up at home. She hurried to Rocco and kissed one chubby cheek after the other. Hey there, little man. Happy birthday. Rocco whined and reached for her. She settled the baby on her hip. You two go have fun. I'll change him. Are his things still upstairs in the nursery? Yeah, thanks. I owe you one. Gabe retreated, likely out of fear she'd get a whiff of the baby and change her mind. Maggie leaned close to Dahlia and whispered, More of the same at home? No, just campaign stuff. She tickled Rocco and let out a fake laugh. Nice try, babe, but something isn't right in Dahlia land. She might have been all smiles, but between Maggie's reaction and the twin wrinkles between Dahlia's eyebrows, I suspected whatever had kept her had nothing to do with work. Maggie gave me a wary look before turning back to Dahlia and forcing a smile. Shauna owes me $10. She bet me you wouldn't come. That's ridiculous. I wouldn't miss this little guy's birthday for the world. Her words came out too fast and her voice too high-pitched. Even if he does smell like roadkill. Yeah, something is definitely going on with her. Desperate to find out what was going on, I cleared my throat and met Dahlia's gaze. Need some help? Dahlia shook her head. I'm good. Not that I particularly wanted to change a diaper, but the rejection stung. Do what you need to do. We'll finish our conversation later. Sure. She held the baby closer and walked upstairs. Maggie watched them go before turning back to me. It's funny, I never pegged you for a quitter. Had anyone else said that to me, I would have told them to fuck off. However, I had been raised to respect women. On top of that, Maggie had earned it when she'd married my brother. I didn't quit. I gave her what she wanted. The 5'0" woman pushed into my personal space and jabbed her finger into my chest. She wanted you. Those 3 words sucker punched me. I wanted her too. I still do, but it's complicated? Newsflash. Life is complicated. Maggie took a half step back and nodded in the direction Dahlia had gone. Lucky for you, it's not too late. She's with Harrison. Don't. She pressed her hand against my mouth. Don't say another word and make more of an ass of yourself. Figure out what you want. No more brooding. No more working all hours of the day and night. Put that famous Marchionni pride aside and be honest with her. Or it will be too late. I hadn't suffered a verbal ass-kicking like that since ever. Unsure how to respond, I nodded. She gave me a once-over, frowned, and marched upstairs. What the hell just happened?
Chapter 2. Dahlia. Okay, spill it. Maggie handed me a clean diaper. Why are you late? I made the mistake of answering an unknown number as I was walking out the door. The memory of the stalker's voice and the horrid things he'd said made my stomach clench. The creep had sent another package, but I didn't want to get into the gory details at her son's birthday party. I'd been dealing with the stalker for almost a year. Gross phone calls and disturbing gifts were nothing new. Oh, honey, I hate this for you. She drew a deep breath. Has your father's private investigator had any luck finding the guy? Not yet, but I'm sure he will soon. I lied through my teeth. It's weird seeing Leo again. What happened down there? And don't say nothing. He looked like someone stole his favorite toy. Leo happened. As much as I'd mentally prepared myself to see him again, one look into his soulful green eyes and I was back on the battlefield of playing Switzerland between my head and my heart. He asked if I brought Harrison to the party. I said no and told him I was moving to Baton Rouge. I took advantage of the squirming birthday boy to avoid her gaze. Did you tell him why? She distracted the baby with his favorite stuffed lizard. Rocco grabbed the green plushie and hugged it to his chest. You know how the Marchionni men are. If I tell Leo about the stalker, he's going to go all caveman on me. I popped the snaps on Rocco's miniature jeans. I can't handle that on top of everything else. You need to tell him the truth about Harrison. She nudged my side. It's none of his business. Leo has made it abundantly clear he's not interested. I couldn't tell her he'd been avoiding me while sneaking around to see our son. No one besides my dad knew he was Gunner's father, and Leo seemed content to keep it that way. Maggie nodded and pressed her lips together as if to keep from saying more. I finished changing the baby and tossed the dirty diaper into the pail. Don't look at me like that. I wasted 11 years of my life waiting for him to decide it was the right time to get serious. If it hasn't happened by now, it's not going to. Dahlia, you and I both know why he didn't want to get involved. It's been over a year since they got out of the mafia. A year, Mags. What's he waiting for? I plopped into a chair and folded my arms like a spoiled child. He said he was giving me space. Because he thinks you're involved with another man. She sighed. I don't want to argue. I get it. You wanted him to fight for you. Is that it? Did I want some grand gesture to prove that Leo had feelings for me? I would have settled for him telling me he loved me. And for the record, I did tell him my father set me up with Harrison as a political stunt. You did? Yes, at Marco's wedding, but evidently Leo still had it in his head that we were dating. In his defense, you and Harrison have been all over the news since your dad decided he was running for president. She muttered. And the man did propose to you. Whose side are you on? I teased, or mostly teased. Yours. Maggie lifted Rocco into her arms. If I've learned anything from being married to Gabe, it's that the Marchionni men are stubborn, proud, and hear what they want to hear. Repetition helps, but sometimes you have to sit them down and force them to listen. I nodded because I knew she was right, but that didn't mean I agreed. I'd wasted a decade waiting for Leo to get his shit together. Now that he had, he'd chosen to sneak around behind my back to see our son rather than risk spending time with me. Come on, it's time for Rocco to smash his cake. She smiled the kind of smile usually reserved for naughty children. She obviously didn't like my choices, but she loved me anyway. That sounds like fun. Can I go Hulk on my cake too? I followed her back downstairs and into an empty kitchen. Some small part of me had hoped Leo would be waiting to finish our conversation. But that part was and would always be sorely disappointed. Maggie laughed. I can think of better ways to relieve stress, but if it helps, go for it. I doubt anything can relieve this stress. Any freaking thing. We walked outside together, but I hung back as 3 generations of Marchionnis crowded around Rocco. A year ago, I would have been at Leo's side in the middle of the party. His brothers would have teased us about being just friends. His father would have given us curious glances, and his mother would have given me her infamous dirty looks. But I would have belonged. They might have been mobsters, and Leo and I might have kept a huge secret from them, but I'd never felt like a stranger on the outside looking in with his family. Until today. I couldn't stand there pretending my heart wasn't broken. Not to mention, I didn't want to explain the tears threatening to run down my face. So like a coward, I snuck back inside while everyone was distracted. Dahlia, wait. Leo caught up with me outside the servants' entrance. I closed my eyes and counted to 5 before I turned to face him. I have to go. Give me 5 minutes. He shoved his hands in his pockets and dipped his chin. A very un-Leo-like posture. Please. I can't do this with him now. My heart won't survive it. The nanny called. Gunner is running a fever. As soon as the words came out of my mouth, I wanted to take them back. Besides the fact he and my nanny were on friendly terms, friendly enough for him to call her and check up on our son, I'd never lied to Leo. How high is it? He shook his head and pulled out his keys. It doesn't matter. He's had ear infections since summer. He should see a doctor. I'll go with you. That he knew about the ear infections surprised me, although it shouldn't have. The more I thought about his deception, the more it ticked me off. I made a mental note to have a long talk with my traitorous nanny. If Leo wanted to know how Gunnar was doing, he should have asked me. But he didn't, because he didn't want to see me. It's Saturday. The pediatrician's office is closed, and I don't think he's sick enough to go to the emergency room. I gathered my courage and said, "You have 5 minutes. Start talking." "What's the deal with you and Harrison?" He folded his arms and stared as if he had every right to ask about my personal life. I'd known Leo since I was 18, but this was the first time he'd ever reminded me of his father. That he'd decided to go all mobster about my love life pissed me off. It was petty of me not to set the record straight right then and there, but I didn't care. "I don't see where this is any of your business." "It became my business when you decided to move my son to Baton Rouge." "Now he cares? Because he thinks I'm going to shack up with another man?" I needed to put an end to the conversation and get the heck out of there before I said something I'd regret. "He's a good man. We've spent a lot of time together attending rallies and fundraisers for my dad." "But?" "No buts." I shrugged to play off the half-truth. "Now, if that's all you wanted to talk about, I should go." "Doll, please. I'm trying here, but everything I say seems to piss you off." He took my hand. "Talk to me." "Harrison asked me to marry him." Leo released my fingers and stepped back. "Let me guess. Your father is all for it." "Yes, but—" I closed the physical distance between us, even though I knew nothing would close the emotional gap. "I'm not in love with him. We're just friends." He swallowed hard. "Like you and I were just friends?" "You and I were never just friends." I couldn't look at him. Not when he stood there staring as if he didn't know how to interpret my words. Not when the man I'd spent my entire adult life waiting for seemed like a stranger. Not when I'd worked so hard to put any thought of us behind me. "I should have called you." His voice softened. "Why didn't you?" He muttered something in Italian and let his head fall back. "I've been asking myself the same question for months." "Let me know when you figure it out. I'd like to understand what I did wrong, so maybe I won't waste another 10 years waiting for the next guy I fall for to love me back." I forced a smile, turned on my heel, and made a beeline for my car. Once again, Leo caught up to me. Only this time, he grabbed my arm, spun me around, and pulled me to his chest. God, he smells good. So damned sexy and too damned familiar. For the first time in months, I felt safe, but it was an illusion. I'd spent years believing he'd protect me. Little did I know then that Leo would be the one to crush me. I jerked free of his embrace. "I can't do this." "You didn't do anything wrong. We were good together. You remember what it was like when we conceived Gunnar. We were happy, couldn't keep our hands off each other." I remembered it all too well. Hateful words like, "There's a difference between love and lust," tumbled through my mind, but I couldn't bring myself to lie to him again, nor would I cheapen what we once had. And then Joe and Rebecca were killed and the bottom fell out. He hung his head. "I was terrified the same thing would happen to you and Gunnar." We both were. I had been 4 months pregnant when Leo's oldest brother and his wife had died. Though the police had blamed their accident on faulty brakes, Leo's father had insisted they were murdered. As it turned out, he was right. They'd been the victims of a mob hit. During the torturous weeks following the accident, Leo had confided some awful things to me, including his family's involvement with the mafia. To make matters worse, my father had hated Leo from the first moment he'd laid eyes on him. Between our fears and pressure from our families, we'd agreed to keep Gunnar's paternity a secret. Those months of insisting my baby was the result of a drunken mistake with a stranger had killed me. I'd only ever been with one man. Needless to say, my friends and family had been shocked, but the only one to figure out the truth was my father.
I'm free now. It's been a year since Marco took over. We haven't had any blowback.
He ran his hands up my arms.
There's nothing stopping us. We could be a family doll. You, me, and Gunnar.
Nothing except my father making a bid for the White House. I hated myself for what I was about to say. He and his brothers had risked their lives to get out of that life, but for some people, it would never be enough. The press would have an absolute field day linking my dad to organized crime.
The Marchionni Corporation is 100% legit now. Let them dig. They won't find anything.
He lowered his face closer to mine. I turned my head, but nothing could lessen my desire to kiss him. It doesn't change public perception. A year ago, your father told the world about his illegal campaign contributions and bribes, not to mention he took the mayor of New Orleans down with him. Leo tightened his jaw.
I'm not my father.
I'm sorry. Maybe if we'd been together before the campaign, or if people knew Gunnar was yours. He scowled.
You're a grown woman. When are you going to start making decisions based on what's right for you instead of what's best for your father's career?
Who says this isn't what's right for me? He raised his chin.
Look, I'm sorry I snuck around behind your back. It was stupid and you have every right to be pissed at me.
I'm not upset that you spent time with Gunnar.
But you are upset because you think I didn't want to spend time with you.
Yes. No. I waved my hand. I don't know. He lowered his voice.
I screwed up, but we can make this work.
How romantic. Just what every little girl dreams of hearing. It's not that simple. Nothing ever was when it came to either of our families.
We can't change the past, but I'm not giving up on the future.
He kissed the top of my head.
I'll wait for you this time.
I met his gaze and did the hardest thing I'd ever done. Let him go. No. As much as it breaks my heart to say it, it's past time we moved on. He tightened his jaw but continued to hold my gaze.
And Gunnar?
Call me when you want to see him, but it's best if we don't tell anyone he's yours.
Marco knows.
Leo frowned.
He's not happy we've kept it from the family, but he won't tell anyone.
That's fine, as long as he keeps quiet. I hated the lies. I'd come close to telling Maggie and Shauna so many times over the years, but I couldn't do it. Not without speaking to Leo first, and like so many others, that was a conversation we'd never gotten around to having. I should go. He tucked my hair behind my ear.
May I kiss you goodbye?
Regardless of my answer, I'd shatter into a million pieces the second I pulled out of the driveway. It might have been foolish, but I wanted some sort of closure. A ritual like a funeral and headstone to remember the death of years of hopes and dreams. I glanced from the wrought iron gate at the end of the drive to the floodlights and finally to the security cameras. If we were going to do this, I wanted privacy. Not here. Leo dragged me to our secret spot. If there was one good thing about lying to our friends and family, we knew every dark corner and blind spot from security on the property. Grief tightened my chest. This is it. Our last kiss. Leo's hands shook as he cupped my face. Still staring into my eyes, he leaned forward. At the last moment, he sighed and pressed his brow to mine.
I can't fucking do this. We can't be over.
I'm sorry. I brushed my lips across his. Before I could pull away, he slid his arms around me and kissed me as if his life depended on it. It would have been so easy for me to fall back in love with him, to believe that kiss was a promise. Had he once, in the course of the conversation, said he loved me, I doubted I would have had the strength to walk away. But he hadn't. A clamor of voices and flashes of light broke the spell. I'd been so lost in my thoughts, in the kiss, in him, that it took me a moment to realize what was happening. A pack of paparazzi had slipped inside the gate and were shouting questions like,
Does Harrison know you're cheating on him?
and,
Are you aware the Marchionnis have ties to organized crime?
and,
Dahlia, how does the governor feel about you sleeping with a mobster?
oh God. I froze in place, giving the photographers enough access to my stunned face to fill thousands of articles. Leo pressed my head against his chest, angled my body away from the cameras, and hurried us back into the kitchen.
Are you okay?
Not trusting my voice, I shook my head. Gabe burst into the kitchen.
What the hell is going on out there? The paparazzo came through the gate.
Leo raked his hands through his hair.
This never would have happened before Pops stepped down as capo. They wouldn't have dared. You're right. I need to speak to Marco about this.
Gabe motioned between us.
You two stay here. Will do.
Leo pulled me closer.
Tell him Dahlia needs security for the evening.
I glanced from Gabe's hard-set jaw to Leo's murderous expression and choked back a sob. I can't do this. I can't go out there alone. But if I go out with security, this is a mess. An absolute mess. Leo tilted my face toward his and waited until I met his gaze.
Doll, it's going to be okay. I know you. You'll be fine once you've had time to cry, get angry, and process what happened.
He held me close and whispered,
I'm here for you, babe. Whatever you need.
as he had so many times before, Leo knew exactly what to say, when to hold me, and when to give me space. In a perfect world, we could have had it all. Unfortunately, our worlds were far from perfect.
Chapter 3. Leo. Let me get this straight. Marco, the Marchionni capo, is visiting the States without enough security to get rid of a dozen reporters? I shoved my hands in my pockets to keep from throttling Gabe. It's a kid's birthday party, for Christ's sake. He only brought 2 men. The rest of his team has the night off. My brother rubbed the back of his neck. We got the ones who were trespassing off the property, but can't force them or the others to leave the sidewalk. I'd spent the first 30 years of my life in the mafia. I'd heard and seen more than my fair share of bullshit, but the nonsense Gabe was spouting topped it all. I knew Marco had traveled with an entourage because I'd met his jet at the airport. Marco had other reasons for refusing to get involved with the situation in the driveway. Reasons like keeping me and my brothers as far from the Cosa Nostra as possible. Dahlia eased away from my side. Leo, it's okay. It'll make things worse if I walk out there with armed guards. She was right, but I had zero intentions of allowing her to leave without some sort of escort. Then I'll drive you home and have someone bring your car after the party. That's not a good idea. The photos are going to be all over the internet as it is. My mother planted her hands on her hips. Dahlia rubbed her temples. This is a disaster. Migraine. Stupid question. I might not have seen her in months, but I knew everything about her. She took her coffee with almond milk and a ton of sugar. Her favorite color was dark purple. She wore a size 9 shoe and hated it. Her worst fear was turning out cold and bitter like her mother. But she loved her father fiercely, and she'd suffered from migraines since she'd fallen off a horse on her 12th birthday. Dahlia rooted around in her purse and pulled out an amber-colored prescription bottle. Not yet, but it's definitely coming. May I have a glass of water? Of course, dear. My mother shot me a quick glare before walking to the fridge and retrieving a bottle of water. I'd offer to allow Stuart to drive you home, but I no longer have a say in what happens in this family. Evelyn Marchionni hadn't climbed down from her cross since the day my brothers and I had put her under the mob version of house arrest. She'd gone behind our backs and worked with the head of another mafia family to stop us from leaving the Cosa Nostra. In the process, she'd spent an ungodly amount of money, nearly started a war, and, last but not least, betrayed our trust. Limiting her access to the outside world was a necessary evil, but she'd never let us forget it. Gabe pinched the bridge of his nose. "Ma's bodyguard." "You mean my keeper?" She raised her chin as if daring him to contradict her. He rolled his eyes. "Stuart will make sure you get home safely. We'll have someone bring your car by later tonight." "That'd be great, thanks." Dahlia popped the pills into her mouth and chased them with several gulps of water. "Yes, thank you." I frowned at Gabe for no reason. My irritation had precious little to do with him. He was doing the best he could under the circumstances, but said circumstances sucked. While I hated the BS that came with being in the mob, I missed having security teams, endless cash, and powerful business associates at my fingertips. Once upon a time, I would have made a phone call and the reporters outside the gates would have disappeared as if by magic. "I don't usually leave the house alone these days. I should have known better than to risk it." Dahlia sighed. Gabe glanced between us. "I'm surprised you don't have a Secret Service detail since your father is running for president." She hitched a shoulder. "Candidates and their spouses aren't authorized to have government protection until just before the convention. After the general election, other family members are eligible. That is, if he wins." The mere thought of the honorable governor of the great state of Louisiana, Dahlia Calhoun, running the entire country sent a chill down my spine. The man hated me with a passion, and the feeling was mutual. "I'll speak to Stuart." Gabe turned and walked out of the kitchen. Evelyn's gaze drifted from Dahlia's face to my hand on her shoulder. Stepping away from me, Dahlia asked my mom, "How is Papa Joe doing? He has good days and bad." She wrung her hands. "I hated to leave him in Sicily, but I couldn't miss my grandson's first birthday." Dahlia nodded and glanced at me. I had no idea what was going on behind her icy blue eyes, but if I had to guess, I'd say the subject of my terminally ill father made her regret keeping Gunner's paternity a secret. "Perhaps it's best if the two of you keep your distance from each other until after the election," Evelyn said. "Leave it to Ma to pour acid into a fresh wound." "You're right," Dahlia sighed. "The hell she is." "Thanks, Ma, really. But we are both adults." "At least one of you is acting like it." Evelyn gave me a weary smile before rejoining the party. "She hasn't changed at all." Dahlia grinned. "Nope." I slid onto a bar stool. "The Marchionnis are known for our stubbornness." "That's a bit of an understatement." She leaned her hip against the island. I had a million things I wanted to say to her, but I didn't have time to get into any of them. Stuart would be down any second to whisk her away. Rather than launching into a lengthy explanation of the past or my thoughts on our future, I went with the blunt truth. "I'm not going to give up on us, though." Her eyes widened. "But we agreed it's over. It's time to move on." "No, babe. You said that. I never agreed." My palms itched to touch her, but I knew better than to push my luck. She rubbed her right temple again. "Leo." "When the shit went down with Joe and Rebecca, we agreed to be friends until things settled, but the plan was always to end up together. I waited until she met my gaze. That's all I'm asking for." "To end up together?" She arched an eyebrow. "I'm willing to take it slow, but yes, the end goal is the same. For me, anyway." "You can't blame everything on what happened to Joe and Rebecca. We'd snuck around for months before they died." Dahlia pointed to the sliding glass doors. "We've lied to our friends and families for years. Why? Because my father was a lawmaker and yours was a criminal? Joe's death didn't change anything. It only solidified our excuses." No more lies. No more sneaking around. I wanted to argue about her revising our history, but there was no point. She was mostly right. We'd tried to have our cake and eat it too for so long the icing was covered with mold. Dahlia shook her head. "Did you hear what those reporters said to me?" I'd heard every disgusting word. Part of me wanted to cut their tongues out of their filthy mouths, but the saner part had other ideas. We can get out in front of this. Come clean about Gunner. Give them a juicy story of college sweethearts reuniting and defying the odds. We can turn this around. She stared with an odd mixture of curiosity and horror, as if I'd asked her to hack off every other toe. You can't be serious. I rested my elbows on the island and clasped my hands. I'm dead serious. I want you and my son in my life. She winced. Not exactly the reaction I'd hoped for. I'm screwing this up. Time to change the subject. An argument is the last thing either of us needs. The reporters. Is that what Maggie meant earlier when she said more of the same? Yes and no. Dahlia rubbed her temples again. This time she did it hard enough to leave red marks on her pale skin. Talk to me. I took a step in her direction, but she held up her hands. Since my dad's campaign kicked into high gear, my personal life has been national news. The media attention has made things difficult. Her voice cracked. My mind immediately went to Harrison fucking Merriweather. Difficult how? Stuart walked into the kitchen, took one look at us and frowned. Sorry to interrupt. Give us a few minutes, I said without bothering to turn my head in his direction. I never should have allowed so many months to pass without speaking to her. Once upon a time, I'd known every detail of her life, but now I had no clue what was really going on. Dahlia sighed. No, it's okay. I really should get home. Shit, I'd forgotten all about Gunner's fever. Text me his temperature. If need be, I'll meet the two of you at the hospital. Hospital? She furrowed her brow a half-second before her cheeks reddened, a sure sign she'd lied. She lied to me? About our son? What the hell? Gunner's fever. Right, ear infections. I'll call you if he gets worse, but it's probably nothing to worry about. I stared, waiting for her to come clean. He's not sick. I don't know why I said that. She avoided my gaze. Actually, that's not true either. I can't do this. I understand. I didn't understand a damn thing. Ever since she said my name in the kitchen, my entire freaking life made no sense. I need to let Maggie know I'm leaving. Again. Dahlia pulled her purse higher on her shoulder and marched to the backyard. Running my hand over my mouth and jaw, I watched her go. Stuart shifted his weight from one foot to the other, as if unsure if he should follow her or speak to me. I nodded toward the sliding glass doors. Don't let her out of your sight until she's inside her house. Of course, sir. Call me when she's safe. I hesitated before adding, take care of any reporters you see. Stuart's jaw tightened. Define take care of. Chase them off, threaten them. Do what you need to do without violence. She doesn't need any more stress. He gave me a curt nod and walked outside. What the hell is going on with you, doll?
Chapter 4. Dahlia. On a good day, it took approximately 15 minutes to drive from the Marchioni's Garden District mansion to my place in Marigny. Unfortunately, it was anything but a good day. I needed to contact my father before the photos of me and Leo hit the internet. He'd have a coronary no matter how he found out, but I wanted him to hear it from me. I'd dealt with reporters most of my life. It came with the territory when growing up the daughter of a prominent politician. However, the paparazzi hadn't started shoving cameras in my face until my father announced his run for the White House. Since then, I could barely walk out my front door without unflattering pictures ending up on the internet. I should have known better than to kiss Leo. No place was safe from the freaking media. I glanced between Stuart and my phone. He'd worked security for the Marchionnis for years, but I wasn't sure I could trust him. With my luck, he'd report everything I said back to Leo, or worse, Evelyn. Stuart fiddled with the GPS.
It looks like there's an accident on Canal, and the side streets are jammed. Could be a while.
I need to call my father, but... I frowned, trying to think of a diplomatic way to explain my situation. Stewart nodded.
You worried about your privacy?
Yes.
I won't repeat anything I overhear to the Marchionnis. I learned that lesson the hard way.
He frowned without taking his eyes off the road. I'd heard something about him reporting Marco's personal business to Evelyn, but it couldn't have been too bad if he still worked for the Marchionnis. Still, I needed to watch what I said. I glanced at the clock and counted backward to the moment the flashes had gone off. Almost 2 hours had passed, long enough for the photographers to find buyers for the juicy pictures. Thank you. Gathering my courage, I dialed my father's personal number.
Dahlia, I was just about to call you.
His voice sounded smooth as honey and almost as sweet. Too sweet. He wasn't alone.
Hang on for a minute, darling. There's something I need to discuss with you.
Sure. I turned and stared at a couple walking hand in hand down the sidewalk. He leaned in to kiss her cheek, and she laughed. Were Leo and I ever like that? So carefree? A rustling sound came over the phone, followed by the thud of a door closing. I braced myself for the disappointment in my dad's voice.
Dahlia.
Robert Becker, my father's right-hand man for as long as I could remember, made a tisking sound.
Would you care to explain to me how you let this happen?
The fact he had my dad's phone didn't surprise me. I'd grown up with two fathers, the one responsible for creating me and the one who managed his affairs. Nothing got past Robert. He'd run background checks on my friends and their parents. He'd hired image consultants to dress me. Hell, he'd personally gone out and bought feminine hygiene products the first time I'd gotten my period. I didn't see them. It was careless, but I have an idea how to fix this. Actually, Leo had the idea, but I wasn't about to tell Robert that. He huffed out a humorless laugh.
Careless? You allowed yourself to be photographed with a known mobster.
Maybe it's time we were honest about me and Leo. I didn't dare mention Leo's relationship to Gunnar in front of Stewart. College sweethearts reuniting.
The devil will open a snow cone shop in hell before that happens. No, your father and I are already brainstorming ideas to fix this.
He lowered his voice.
Do you realize the potential scandal you've caused? You were told to stay away from those people.
It was Maggie and Gabe's son's first birthday party. My throat tightened. I didn't mean for this to happen, but now that it has, the truth is bound to come out. Isn't it better if we get in front of it?
We are getting in front of it, and whatever story we tell the press, it will not involve admitting you spread your legs for that piece of trash.
My blood ran cold. Robert was like family, but at the end of the day, he was my father's employee. He'd crossed the line. How dare you speak to me like that? Put my dad on the phone.
The governor is busy.
I could all but hear his eyes shifting back and forth. He had to know he'd gone too far. Then this conversation is over. Robert sucked in a breath.
Forgive me. It's been a long day. Hold on while he finishes his other call.
My head throbbed in time with my racing pulse. If I didn't calm down, I'd end up with a killer migraine. What felt like hours later, my father's voice came through the phone.
Sorry to keep you waiting. We have quite the mess on our hands.
I drew a quick breath. I'm sorry about the photos, but Leo and I
are over.
He cleared his throat.
I love you, sweetheart, but that boy has been trouble since the day you met him. I spoke to Harrison. He's rightfully upset, but he's willing to go through with the engagement.
Of course he is. But it has nothing to do with his feelings for me and everything to do with his career aspirations. I can't marry a man I don't love, not even for you.
I'd hoped the two of you would hit it off.
He sighed.
Couldn't you try again? You've both been under a lot of pressure, but I know he cares for you and Gunnar.
I've tried for over a year. And for the record, Harry doesn't want anything to do with Gunner Dad.
I believe you're wrong about that.
Regardless, I don't love him. I hated to disappoint my father, but wet kindling had more chance of producing sparks than me and Harry.
Robert's going to fix things with the press. In the meantime, I need you to come home and stay here until after the election.
I hadn't lived under their roof since I'd left for college. The idea of moving my son into that house of horrors sent a chill down my spine. I can't do that.
Because of your mother.
He sounded as tired as I felt. I can't have Gunner around her, Dad. I just can't. More specifically, I couldn't have him around the two of them together. They were like ammonia and bleach, perfectly fine on their own, but toxic when mixed.
Then it's best if you distance yourself from me and the campaign.
He murmured to someone else in the room. My chest tightened. Distance how? Are you firing me?
I'm sorry, Dahlia. The one thing I've asked of you is that you stop seeing Leo Marchionni. That family is dangerous to more than my political career. Do you really think it's a coincidence this business with the stalker started around the time you got back from Sicily and began seeing Harrison?
You can't possibly believe Leo has anything to do with that. Actually, he probably did believe Leo was behind the frightening letters and phone calls. My father hated anything and everything Marchionni except Gunner. Then again, he considered the child 100% Calhoun. He cleared his throat.
If you're here,
You and Robert can keep an eye on me. I loved my dad, but he'd asked too much. I was a grown woman. Sure, I'd screwed up and allowed myself to be photographed with Leo, but that didn't mean I needed a chaperone.
I hate to cut this short, but I'm late for a meeting. Come home, Dahlia. Robert will help you hire movers.
I choked back angry tears and tried to see the situation from his perspective. I'd all but handed the press a loaded gun. I could understand why he'd gone into Papa Bear mode. However, that didn't change the fact I couldn't bring my son into that environment. My father said something I didn't catch. Rather than asking for clarification, I stood my ground. I'm not moving into the governor's mansion.
I wish you'd reconsider.
Robert sighed.
But think about it. Those photos have sent the campaign into crisis mode. It's time we circled the wagons, Dahlia Bug.
He hadn't used my childhood nickname in years. I couldn't decide if he'd done it to manipulate me or because he'd overstepped his boundaries. Either way, it was a heck of a lot better than insulting me. We can discuss damage control over the phone. He sighed again, this time even more dramatically than the first.
I didn't want to have to mention this, but Wayland gave me permission to force your hand. He does subsidize your lifestyle, after all.
I'd heard the threat a million times before, although I'd worked for my father's administration for years. Few people, including my dad, considered me an actual employee. To make matters worse, my parents owned the house I'd lived in since Gunner had been born. Early on, they'd helped pay for his nanny and health care and the million other things a child needed. Not because I'd asked them to, because they'd left me no choice. Child support payments created a paper trail, and God forbid someone caught on and linked the almighty Calhouns to a mafia family. I needed to think fast, but my brain moved in slow motion. My car is at the Marchionnis.
I'll send a driver.
He spoke as if the matter was settled. Memories of my childhood flashed through my mind, my father working himself into oblivion, my mother drinking herself into a rage, me hiding in my room and praying she wouldn't come for me. I couldn't go back there. I wouldn't. I've been looking at apartments in Baton Rouge. I'll find a place as soon as possible, but I'm not moving into the governor's mansion.
The car will be there first thing in the morning. You will come home, for your father's sake. Do I make myself clear?
Perfectly, but I said no. I hung up before he could respond. It might have been cowardly, but I was a practical woman. Practical enough to remove myself from an argument that would end in more threats. Besides, he couldn't exactly take me out of my home by force. Not with the paparazzi watching my every move.
Everything okay?
Stewart glanced my way before turning his attention back to the road. As good as can be expected. I'd have another conversation with my dad once we'd both had a chance to cool off. Once the smoke cleared with the photos, he'd see reason. He had to. Stewart and I spent the remainder of the drive in an awkward silence. When we arrived at my house, I blew out a sigh of relief when no reporters jumped out of the bushes. Thank you for driving me home.
It was my pleasure.
He cut the engine and pulled the keys from the ignition. You don't need to walk me to the door. Stewart nodded to a large man standing at the corner. The guy wore a Cuban shirt, knee socks, and sandals.
That's no tourist.
I pressed myself back against the seat in hopes of staying out of sight. Sure looks like one. How can you tell?
This neighborhood doesn't draw many sightseers, and I'm betting that bulge in his pocket isn't a water bottle. My guess is a telescopic lens for that camera around his neck.
Damn it. I dug in my purse for my keys. I'm going to make a break for it.
No. Stay put until I give you the signal.
He climbed out of the vehicle and strode up the street toward the paparazzo. The reporter turned and ran as fast as his stubby legs would carry him. Stewart glanced over his shoulder and gave me a quick nod before taking off after the guy. I bolted for the house, dropped the keys, circled back to pick them up, and made it to the front porch in time to see another reporter coming from the back of my house. Christina, the nanny, threw the front door open and ushered me inside. I called the police 5 minutes ago and reported 2 of them in the backyard. When I'd left the Marchionnis, I had every intention of giving the woman hell for keeping Leo and Gunner's visits from me. One glance at her twitching eye and shaking hands, and I thought the better of it. I needed her more than I cared to admit. Are you okay? Did they try to get inside? I caught them looking in the kitchen window. Her voice rose with each word. Scared the dickens out of me. You know I love that little boy, but I'm not sure I can. Oh, God, no. She can't quit. Please, you've had quite a scare. Go home, get some rest. You'll feel better in the morning. She gulped down a breath and sobbed it back up. I hate to leave you without help, but I'm too old for this, Miss Calhoun. Christina hadn't called me by my surname since the day she'd interviewed for the job. Please reconsider. I'm sorry. She avoided my gaze. I have to go. I lowered my voice and wrapped my arms around my middle. Shouldn't you at least stay and talk to the police? They'll want a witness statement. Give them my contact information if you must. She snatched her purse from the counter and hurried out the front door. As if he sensed her exit, Gunner cried out from the back of the house. Miss Tina! How in the hell am I going to explain to a toddler that his beloved nanny isn't coming back? Worse still, how am I going to explain we're homeless? Chapter 5. Dahlia. I'm not going to earn the Mother of the Year award anytime soon. Judging by the female police officer's sour expression, she agreed. Gunner sat on the floor eating cookies and drinking bunny milk, strawberry-flavored sugar added to what would otherwise be a healthy drink. The bribe had worked. He'd stopped screaming for the nanny, and I'd managed a few moments of peace to speak to 2 of New Orleans' finest.
You didn't personally witness the reporters in the backyard?
The female officer's frown deepened. No. As I was saying, my nanny saw them looking through the back window. The incident scared her to the point she resigned shortly after I came home. I told them the same slightly twisted version of the truth twice before.
I see.
The woman tapped the piece of paper with Christina's contact information.
We'll follow up with your nanny and take a look around outside. Otherwise, there isn't anything we can do.
I'd figured as much, but nodded and smiled just the same. Thank you.
Ms. Calhoun, is there somewhere else you can stay until after the election?
The male officer seemed to have taken the good cop role. That or his crooked grin was a failed attempt at flirting.
For yours and your son's safety.
I'll give it some thought. I stood, hoping to speed things along. My migraine lurked close, waiting to attack. I needed to take care of Gunner's nighttime routine and crash before it struck. They exchanged quick glances, pushed to their feet, and walked to the front door. The male turned and handed me a card.
Don't hesitate to call if you need anything.
Thank you, Officer Stevens. I pretended not to notice he'd written his personal number on the back and slid it into my pocket. But I'm sure the reporters will ease off now that they know I've filed a police report. Mama! Gunner let out a screech that set my teeth on edge. Bunny milk all gone! If you'll excuse me. I forced a smile. The female pursed her lips.
Have a good night, Miss Calhoun.
You too. I waited for them to walk outside, double-locked the door, and hurried back into the kitchen. Gunner sat in a pink puddle. He held his chocolate-coated hands out to me and made a sound of complete exasperation. Oddly enough, I'd heard his father make the same noise earlier that day. I couldn't help but smile. Leo might have broken my heart, but he'd given me a precious gift. A wet, gooey, cookie-covered gift that I loved more than life itself. How about a bath? Gunner nodded. Yucky. Uh-huh. I took his hand, scooped up the mail from the kitchen counter, and headed for the bathroom. 5 minutes later, my little man was shampooed, scrubbed clean, and playing with his plastic boats. Rather than taking him out of the tub, I took advantage of his love of all things water. Keeping an eye on the toddler, I sorted through the stack of mail. That's when I saw it. A square white envelope with no postmark, and an all too familiar handwriting scrawled across the front. Another one? I caught myself gripping my throat and lowered my hand. There was no way in hell I could open the letter with Gunner in the room. The child was more in tune with my emotions than I was half the time. Okay, buddy, time to get out of the bath. His little body tensed as if preparing to throw a fit, but when he looked at me, he sighed. Mama Thad? Nope, just tired. I'm ready for sleep. He scrunched his nose. In my bed? I don't think we'll both fit in your crib. I set the letter aside and grabbed a towel. He flashed me a grin that was 100% Marchionni. I sleep in your bed. Nope. You know the rules. Mommy's room is okay for naps, but not overnights. I might have plied him with sugar while the police had taken my statement, but there were certain rules I couldn't break. Allowing Gunner to sleep in my bed was one of them. It had taken me months to break the habit. Unfortunately, I'd yet to get him to stop sucking his thumb, sleeping in a crib, or wearing diapers. Gunner made that exasperated sound again, but allowed me to take him out of the tub without a fuss. I want Miss Dina. It dawned on me I was in trouble. I didn't have childcare, and my father's next fundraising event was Wednesday in Iowa. I had to confirm the final details with the caterers, the venue, the press. A split second later, I remembered my father firing me. Thankfully, I had squirreled away enough money to survive for a few months. Longer if I was careful. Sweetheart, Miss Christina isn't coming back tonight. Miss Tina, no bye-bye. He stomped his foot and folded his arms. How about I take care of you instead of Miss Christina? Okay. Gunner yawned wide enough to show me his tonsils. Unless I was mistaken, his second molars had come in when I wasn't paying attention. Staying home with him for a little while suddenly seemed like a blessing. After brushing his teeth, reading him the same story 3 times, and singing him a lullaby, I kissed his forehead and returned to the bathroom. Once again, the letter on the counter sent a chill down my spine. The first notes and packages from the nut job had arrived shortly after my father had announced his intentions to run for president. They'd started off fairly normal. Not that a stranger professing his love in graphic terms could ever be considered normal. As time went by and more stories of me and Harrison hit the news, the letters grew more threatening. The last 3 described how the author planned to kill me. As if that weren't bad enough, they appeared to be written in blood. I sank onto the couch, debating between opening the envelope and calling the private investigator my father had hired. Dad and Robert both agreed it was better to handle the matter quietly rather than going to the police. However, the PI had proved to be as worthless as tits on a bullfrog. I opened the letter and immediately wished I hadn't.
Did you think I wouldn't see the pictures of you kissing another man? I've waited long enough. I'm coming for you and Gunner. Be ready for me, darling Dahlia. You will be mine, one way or another.
Oh, God. Colors danced before my eyes, and even the dim light stabbed at my pupils. My stomach clenched a millisecond before pain blared through my head. It took all of my strength to turn off the lamp. I couldn't focus on a single thought, but that didn't stop my brain from spinning out of control. The stalker is close. He saw the photos, wrote the letter, and stuffed it in my mailbox within an hour. He threatened Gunner. I should call the police. But the media and Dad's campaign. I can't. The timing will seem suspect, like I'm making it up. My phone rang and scared the ever-loving crap out of me. I fumbled with the damn thing and hit answer without checking the caller ID. Hello?
Dahlia, this is Robert.
He could have cut diamonds with his voice. Hard, cold, and sharp.
I just received a call from the New Orleans chief of police.
With everything going on, I'd forgotten to warn my dad about Christina's 911 call and the subsequent interview and report. I was going to call, but I had to get Gunner down first, seeing as I no longer have a nanny.
Yes, well, once again, you have caused quite a problem for your father.
I could all but hear him pacing. I received another letter from the stalker. This is after the package and the phone call. He sighed and spoke to me in a chiding tone.
You know the procedure. Email photos of the notes and items to the PI.
This one feels different.
With all due respect, Dahlia, this is nothing new. If this person wanted to hurt you, I'm sure they would have done it by now.
Thanks, really. Thanks for your compassion. My finger hovered over the disconnect button.
About the police report. You realize this incident looks like you're trying to deflect attention away from the photos of you and Marchionni.
Goodbye, Robert. I hung up on him and crammed the phone back in my pocket. I got it. I did. My father had a million things on his plate. However, that didn't lessen the sting of our once close relationship being handled by a third party. I missed my dad. He never would have discounted my fear of the stalker. I had no clue how long I laid in the dark, trying my best to fall asleep and end the pounding in my head. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke to the dulcet sounds of Gunner screaming. Moving slowly, I forced myself upright and made my way down the hall. It took my migraine-addled brain a moment to realize something was wrong, and another to figure out what it was. My heart leapt into my throat. Gunner's bedroom window was open, and the nightlight illuminated muddy footprints on the pale blue rug beside his crib. Someone was in my house. A reporter? The stalker? Oh, God. Every horrid word he'd ever written to me flashed through my mind. The threats, the promises, the twisted professions of love. Scooping Gunnar into my arms, I whispered, "Shh, it's okay." He continued to wail. I had to get to safety, but how? I had two choices: climb out the window and risk falling and hurting Gunnar, or go back the way I'd come and possibly run into the intruder. I couldn't hear myself think over the crying child, and that posed an entirely different problem. Gunnar was like a human air horn. The stalker could easily follow the wailing baby. Gathering my courage, I threw a quilt over his head, tucked it in around him, and pressed him against my chest. One hand on the window frame, I eased my legs over the sill, jumped, and royally screwed up my landing. My ankle bent at an angle that sent a jolt of pain from my toes to my right thigh. Tightening my grip on Gunnar, I went down hard, but managed to twist my upper body and avoid crushing him. Without my hands to break my fall, my shoulder took the brunt of the damage. Gunnar's screams ratcheted up from distress to all-out terror, high and shrill. The silhouette of a man, a large, terrifying man, stared down at us from the window.
Chapter 6. Leo. The party continued around me, but I couldn't get my mind off Dahlia. Long ago, a psychology professor told me that it took great insight or great pain for people to change. Which had Dahlia suffered to turn her into someone who would lie about a sick child? While I hadn't seen Dahlia in a little over a year, we'd been fixtures in each other's lives for 10 times as long. We'd met as college freshmen. I'd known her during her sorority phase, her rebel without a clue phase, and her sexual exploration phase. I'd held her when some jackass broke her heart, when she'd failed chemistry, and when she peed on the stick that told us we were going to have a baby. Insight and pain aside, I fucking knew her well enough to know she wouldn't lie without a damned good reason. It killed me to know her damned good reason was to get away from me. Maggie plopped down in the patio chair beside me. Are you okay? I'm so far from okay. I'm not even on the same continent. I finished my beer and set the bottle on the deck. I apologize for giving you a hard time earlier. She gave me a sly smile that told me she wasn't all that sorry. Make it up to me by telling me what's really going on with Dahlia. She closed her eyes and dipped her chin. You know I can't betray her confidence. It's girl law. The female version of the bro code. I get it, but this is different. I'm worried about her. She wasn't herself tonight. I needed a better argument that might hurt feelings if I expected Maggie to spill it. If the paparazzi's freaking her out, we can handle them. Pops has connections. Papa Joe's connections can't help this time. She drew a breath as if to say more, but shook her head and sighed. All you can do is let her know you care. What the hell, Mags? I glanced around to make sure Gabe hadn't heard me raise my voice to his wife. I need to know if something serious is going on. You two haven't seen each other in quite a while. Give her a chance to learn to trust you again. Her words hit me in the solar plexus. She doesn't trust me? You hurt her. Maggie stood and forced a smile. It's not like you can pretend that last year didn't happen. I wanted to tell her Dahlia wasn't the only one who'd been hurt. I wanted to argue that we had the kind of friendship that time couldn't touch. I wanted to believe everything would finally work out. The stars would align, and Dahlia and I would finally be together. But I couldn't bullshit her or myself. I have my work cut out for me. You're right. I grin because I've been raised to believe that men didn't cry. Put in a good word for me, will you? Of course. She kissed my cheek. While we're on the subject of neglected relationships. Neglected relationships? Is that what I'd done? Abandoned Dahlia because of my pride? Maggie lowered her voice. Spend some time with your brother. Gabe misses you. Are you trying to pawn your husband off on me? I chuckled because what else could I do? She was right. I'd avoided Gabe because I was fucking jealous. As if he knew we were talking about him, Gabe walked over and slung his arm around her shoulders. It's about time we call it a day. The kids are tired and cranky. Sure, give me a minute to say goodnight to your mom. She glanced at me, bugged her eyes, and nodded toward my brother before walking away. I took the hint. "We should take the boat out one day this week." He smirked. "Let me guess. My wife set up a play date for the two of us." "Something like that." I pushed to my feet. "But it's overdue. Marco and Dante are in town for another week. I'll set something up with them and Enzo. It's been too long since we all hung out." "Sounds good." He gave me a half hug and slapped my back harder than necessary. I'd planned to wait for Stuart to return from dropping off Dahlia, but the kiddos weren't the only ones who were tired and cranky. Besides, I intended to take Maggie's advice and work on rebuilding Dahlia's trust, which made pumping the guy for information counterproductive. An hour later, I'd said my farewells and made the short drive to my place in the quarter. The second I walked in the door, I knew I had a problem. After spending the day surrounded by people, the place felt empty. The click-clack of dog paws and hardwoods filled my ears. A split second later, I was surrounded by 3 fluffy poodles. Fifi, Cupcake, and Eugene belonged to a guy our father had ordered Gabe to off. My brother hadn't pulled the trigger. Instead, Gabe had given him enough cash to leave New Orleans. The only problem was, Artie Guzman couldn't go on the run with 3 award-winning purebred poodles. Gabe's solution? Stash the dogs at my place. 18 months later, I still had them and wasn't about to give them up. I loved the little furballs. After a quick walk so they could do their business, I filled their bowls with the boiled chicken and brown rice I'd made the night before. The poodles inhaled their food and claimed their favorite spots on the couch. I plopped down between them and turned on the Nature Channel for the 3 poodle tears. No TV for me. I had some shit to sort out, and it was high time I stopped avoiding it. How in the hell do I win Dahlia back? Truth be told, I'd never had to win her in the first place. We clicked from the moment we'd met, which was a miracle in and of itself. I hadn't been interested in anything serious, and she hadn't done casual sex. I'd never had a female friend, but I'd known I'd wanted her in my life. It had taken a few years and a hell of a lot of debating for us to cross the line and become lovers. We kept it on the down low for both our sakes, and then everything had changed when we'd found out she was pregnant with Gunnar. Before we'd had a chance to recover from the surprise, my brother had been murdered. What I needed was a way to remind her of how we used to be. Scratch that. I needed a way to show her how great we could be now. A fresh start, a clean slate, a new fucking beginning, without all of the baggage. Easier said than done. My ringing phone interrupted my trip down memory lane. The number on the screen made my pulse race. Dahlia. I swallowed hard and tried to sound casual. "Hey, you." "Leo, thank God, are you home?" She sounded out of breath, and Gunnar wailed in the background. I just walked in the door. My already quick heart rate shot into hyperdrive. "What's wrong?" "Someone was in my house." Dahlia's voice cracked. "I don't know who to call. The police were out once already, but they couldn't do anything. Christina wasn't here. I panicked." "Doll, slow down. Who was in the house? Was it a reporter?" Grabbing my keys and wallet, I headed for the door. "No, maybe, I don't know. I grabbed Gunnar and ran." Images of her fleeing with our son in her arms sent a chill down my spine. "Where are you now?" "The neighbors. Can you come?" "I'm on my way. Which house?" I hit the ground floor and sprinted to my car. Her place was only a couple of miles from mine, but it might as well have been in another state. "The pink one behind me." Mrs. Simmons. I remember her. I could barely hear her over the baby. "Call the police again." "They can't help." "Babe, if they were already out, they'll take a second call more serious." I'd never felt so damned helpless. Not long ago, I would have given an order and had an armed security detail on the way. As it stood, I'd have to go through Marco to get help. "You don't understand." She murmured soft words to the baby, but he continued to cry. "Explain it to me." "Hang on." Her voice became muffled as if she was speaking to someone else in the room. "I need to go. Please, hurry." "No, don't you dare hang up." Anything could happen in the few minutes it'd take me to reach them. I couldn't do jack shit about it, but as long as I could hear their voices, I'd know they were safe. "Put the phone down if you have to, but stay on the line." "Okay." Crushing the cell to my ear, I hurried to my car and wove my way through the narrow cobblestone streets of the quarter and crossed Esplanade Avenue. In the background, Dahlia alternated between cooing to her son and speaking to her neighbor. While I could only make out every few words, I distinctly heard her mention the governor, a stalker, and the police. Screw Maggie's advice. I needed to know what the hell was going on. I parked in front of Mrs. Simmons' place and ran to the front door. The voice in the back of my head shouted to look for reporters or stalkers or whoever the fuck had terrorized my family, but I didn't have time to worry about cameras or tabloids. And if I ever got a hold of the person who had broken into her house, I'd kill him with my bare hands. Mrs. Simmons opened the front door as far as the chain lock would allow. "I'm Leo. Dahlia called me." The elderly woman nodded. "She's in the parlor." My heart pounding, I followed her deeper into the house. Dahlia's wide-eyed expression broke my fucking heart, but it was Gunnar reaching for me that did me in. The little guy's face was red and wet with snot and tears. I took him into my arms without hesitation. "Hey, little man, I've got you. Everything's going to be okay." Gunnar nodded and rested his head on my shoulder. Except for the occasional hiccup and shuddered breath, he quieted. "I'll give you young folks some privacy." Mrs. Simmons shuffled out of the room. Dahlia stared. "Thank you. I couldn't get him to calm down." "He's probably picking up on your stress." I rubbed his back and did the bob and weave maneuver he'd liked since he was a newborn. "Talk to me. What happened?" She nodded to the toddler. Mom signaled for watch what you say. "We had an unexpected visitor. I didn't know he was coming over. He woke Gunnar up." Our son pulled back and wiped his face. "Mama scared me. We fell down." She murmured, "We left through the window." I'm sure she didn't mean to scare you. I needed to have a grown-up conversation with Dahlia, but I couldn't bring myself to peel him off of me. She dipped her chin and drew a shaky breath, and once again I reacted without thinking. Wrapping my free arm around her, I drew her into an embrace, or tried to. She let out a pained breath and tensed. "What is it? Are you Hurt?" I stepped back and looked her over for the first time. Dahlia's hair was snarled, grass stains and mud covered one shoulder, and her pajama pants were torn. Her bare feet were dirty and scratched to hell, and her ankle had swollen to the size of a grapefruit. Christ, how is she still standing? That needs to be checked out. It looks worse than it is. I motioned to Mrs. Simmons' living room. "Sit down. I'll get you some ice." "Really, it's fine." She wrapped her arms around her midsection. I glanced at our son. "For fun's sake, doll. Stop being so stubborn. You need to report this." Gunnar popped his thumb out of his mouth. "Fun's sake, Mama?" I grinned at him despite my foul mood. She looked anywhere except at me. "The last thing any of us need is for this to hit the news." "You mean it's the last thing your father needs?" She sighed. "Think about it, Leo. The media's already in a frenzy about the photos of us." What the hell is she talking about? "So, what does that have to do with this?" "Best case scenario, it'll look like a publicity stunt to shift the focus away from the photos. Worst case, the media will somehow tie it back to you and your family's business." Great. Just fucking great. I'm going to be treated like a mobster, but have none of the perks that go along with being one. I forced myself to check my baggage at the door and focus on Dahlia's needs for once. "I heard you mention a Stalker to Mrs. Simmons. Tell me what's going on." "I will, but not tonight." I seriously needed to have that chat, but I didn't want Gunnar to repeat my words until the end of time. "Mrs. Simmons can keep an eye on the little guy for a few minutes." I said, "Not tonight." Dahlia took Gunnar from my arms. "Thanks for coming, but I shouldn't have called you." "That's garbage. Of course you should have called me." My words came out harsher than I'd intended. Calming an emotionally wrecked Dahlia normally involved a careful dance of leading her without being a pushy SOB, although going completely caveman on her worked in dire situations, and the situation was fucking dire. She hung her head. "You should go. We'll be okay here until tomorrow." Like help. Like help. You need my help. Damn it. She's retreating. Screw it. Time for Neanderthal mode. You're coming home with me. "Leo House?" The kiddo held his hands out and wiggled until Dahlia gave up and handed him back to me. He placed his chubby hands on my cheeks. "Can I come?" Unsure how to answer, I met Dahlia's gaze. She glanced from Gunnar to me and sighed. "That's not a good idea." A better man would have respected her wishes, but I figured if I were going to be treated like scum for the rest of my life, I might as well earn it. And using a child to manipulate his mother was as low as I could get. "You're right, it's not a good idea. It's a fantastic idea." I pulled my head back and grinned at my son. "Right, buddy?" "Right." The burst of enthusiasm seemed to use up the last of his energy. The little guy rested his head on my shoulder, drew a deep breath, and stuck his thumb back into his mouth. Her eyes widened. "That wasn't fair." "You're right." I leaned closer to Dahlia and lowered my voice. "But think about this logically. No offense to Mrs. Simmons, but I doubt she'll be much help if your visitor comes back. You're exhausted. You'll be safe at my place." She rested her hand on Gunnar's back. "Only until I figure out another alternative." "Good enough. For now. Let's go."
Chapter 7. Dahlia. Walking into Leo's condo took almost as much courage as jumping out of a window with my child in my arms, maybe more. I'd been running for mine and Gunnar's lives before, but I'd agreed to stay with Leo of my own free will. What was I thinking? Standing in his living room, surrounded by his things, his scent, his larger-than-life presence, I could hardly breathe, let alone focus. Everywhere I looked reminded me of our time together. The couch, the rug in front of the fireplace, the kitchen counter. We'd made love on all of them. Even the crooked painting in the foyer brought back memories. The damn thing hadn't hung straight since we'd knocked it off the wall in our haste to get each other naked. This is a bad idea. 3 small apricot-colored poodles ran into the room and circled me. That he still had the dogs surprised me. Last I'd heard, he was babysitting them while their owner found a new place to live, 18 months before. I bent to greet them, but stopped short when Leo emerged from the hall, wearing low-slung pajama pants, a white t-shirt, and a frown.
Fifi, Cupcake, Eugene, come.
He patted his thigh and the dogs ran to his side.
I managed to get Gunnar to sleep in the guest room. All it took was his favorite book and the shiny blanket.
Shiny blanket? Book? What the heck is he talking about? Leo dipped his chin.
Like I said, I've spent a lot of time with him over the past year.
He slept here? I struggled to keep the shock out of my voice.
You were traveling a lot.
The situation left me equal parts irritated and relieved. It had hurt when Leo stopped calling me, but the idea that he'd abandoned Gunnar had devastated me. Given everything that's happened, it's good that he's used to being here. He's a creature of habit. I couldn't make eye contact, but at the same time, I couldn't stop staring. I'd spent the previous year learning to live my life without him. I'd moved on, or so I thought. If I'd truly gotten over Leo, my chest wouldn't ache at the sight of him.
Like his father.
He wiggled his brows. I needed to navigate the conversation to neutral territory. I'm surprised you still have the dogs.
Me too, but the little rodents grew on me.
He held up one finger and the poodles sat and waited for him to give them a treat.
Between you and me, I hope Artie forgot where he left them.
Will they be okay around Gunnar now that he's not a baby anymore? Toddlers can be grabby, and poodles can be nippy. Leo pressed his hand to his chest as if I'd offended him.
I'll have you know these little darlings adore Gunnar.
Right, because you and your itty-bitty dogs have been spending time with him. Rather than trying to defend his actions or his man card, Leo motioned to the couch.
Have a seat. I'll get you some ice for your ankle, something for your pain, and wine for your nerves. Then we need to talk.
Too tired and sore to protest, I hobbled to the sofa and sank into the plush cushions. I'd always loved the cream-colored sectional. It made me think of clouds or marshmallows. That is, if clouds or marshmallows smelled like Leo Marchionni. Citrus, fresh-cut lumber, and homemade sin.
Are you sure you don't need to see a doctor?
He handed me a bottle of ibuprofen and 2 glasses, one filled with water and the other wine.
There are a few in town that still owe my family favors. I can arrange a house call.
I'll make an appointment tomorrow if the swelling isn't down. I swallowed the pills as he walked back into the kitchen.
What happened tonight?
Leo filled a large baggie with ice and wrapped it with a dishcloth. It's a long story. I rested my head against the cushions and closed my eyes. I needed sleep, not more conversation that would likely end in an argument. Christina caught 2 reporters looking in the kitchen windows. She called the police, but left before they arrived.
Left?
He sat on the short side of the sectional, half facing me, and the dogs curled up beside him. She quit. I didn't bother to tell him she'd had a conversation with my father's right-hand man. That little detail wasn't pertinent, and it'd only piss him off.
I can't believe she quit without a word. I'm the one who hired her, remember?
I didn't quite remember it that way. He'd given me her name and references, but I'd made the decision. Or had I? Did you know her before she started working for me?
I wouldn't have trusted her with our son if I hadn't.
I felt like a complete idiot. Leo hadn't had to twist Christina's arm to see Gunnar. She had to know the truth. I'll add her to the growing list of people who know you're his dad. He sucked air between his teeth and nodded.
Sorry. Go on. Tell me what happened after she quit.
I would have preferred to pick an argument with him rather than relive the events of the previous few hours, but he needed to understand the situation. Gunnar and I went through our normal nighttime routine. After he was asleep, I crashed on the couch. I woke up to him screaming and went to check on him. That's when I noticed his bedroom window was open.
Was it broken?
Leo's spine stiffened and his nostrils flared. I didn't see any glass on the floor or sill. I hadn't had time to consider how the intruder had come through a normally locked window that sat a half-story off the ground. But there were muddy footprints on the rug beside Gunnar's crib. He looked away and nodded as if to himself.
I'm guessing the guy didn't know it was the nursery window. It's dark on that side of the house, and the only one without bougainvillea growing beneath it.
I thought about the layout of my house and the landscaping. If I had to choose a way to break in, Gunnar's window made sense. I guess, but I don't understand why it was unlocked.
It was a nice day. Christina could have opened the windows to air out the house while you were gone.
I hate to think of what would have happened if Gunnar hadn't woken up. Leo scratched his jaw.
That's another reason I doubt the intruder knew it was the nursery. Scared kids make a lot of noise.
You're right. I was worried the intruder would follow Gunnar's screams and finish the job. Leo's expression darkened.
Tell me about your stalker.
Gulping down my wine, I debated how much to share and decided to tell him everything. The letters started after my dad announced his candidacy. At first, the guy complimented me, said my beauty was an asset to my father's career. They changed when the media started covering mine and Harrison's relationship. He tightened his jaw hard enough to crack his molars.
Changed how?
The stalker wasn't happy that I was dating. The letters became more sexually explicit, and he made some threats. I fought to suppress a shudder, but failed. I'm pretty sure he was attending campaign events. He sent candid photos of Harrison and me together at rallies and fundraising dinners. Leo scratched the dark stubble on his jaw.
He could be a reporter.
I hadn't thought of that, but it made sense. You may be right. I couldn't imagine someone paying $1,000 to attend an event just to scare me. He rubbed his thumb on the pads of his fingers over and over again. He did the same thing when considering the odds at the blackjack table.
You said the psycho sent packages?
I lowered my gaze. It was mostly cheap jewelry and lingerie. He'd follow up with notes asking if I'd worn his gifts.
None of this was reported to the police?
Scowling, Leo stood and paced the room. 3 apricot-colored heads popped up and watched him. My dad and Robert thought it would be better to handle the matter internally. They hired a private investigator, but he hasn't been able to find anything on the guy. He opened his mouth, likely to make a nasty comment about my father, but he snapped it shut and shook his head.
When was the last time you received a letter or package?
I'd expected the question, but didn't want to answer it. I was still woozy from the migraine, and my ankle throbbed. Leo hitting the roof wouldn't help either situation, nor would it calm my already frazzled nerves. Biting my lower lip, I shrugged. He stopped pacing and stared.
Today?
Yes. The stalker's threats echoed through my mind. He said he saw the photos of you and I together and was coming for me and Gunnar. Emotions played over Leo's features like frames on a slot machine. Disbelief, anger, disgust, fear, resignation, pity. Round and round they went as he studied me.
My God, doll.
He crossed the room and sat beside me.
How are you still functioning after living with this for what? A year?
Everyone told me it was nothing to worry about, that it came with being in the public eye. His closeness was both soothing and frightening. No one, not even Harrison, had taken the letters seriously. Sure, Harry had comforted me when I was freaking out, but he'd discouraged me from reporting the stalker to the police. Instead, he'd insisted I remain close to him while in public and tried to do the same in private. Leo was the first person to get it. The fact he still understood me so easily made me want to lower my guard. And that scared me on a level I wasn't ready to think about.
That's complete bullshit. You had every right to be concerned.
He raised his hand as if to brush the hair from my face, but stopped short.
It's been a long day. Why don't we turn in and finish this conversation in the morning?
A shower and a warm bed sounded like heaven. A shower and a warm bed with Leo Marchionni would be a completely different kind of bliss. A short-lived pleasure like pigging out on chocolate. I'd love every second of the silky sweet taste, but would wake up with a stomachache and a few extra pounds worth of regret. As if he'd read my mind, Leo sighed.
It wasn't a proposition, doll. You can take my room. I'll bunk with the little guy.
You don't have to do that. Sharing a bed with him is like sleeping with a mini tornado. I'll crash on the couch.
Like mother, like son, I seem to recall you hugging more than your fair share of the bed and covers.
He chuckled, but the concern in his expression remained. Memories of the two of us tangled in the sheets flashed unwelcome through my mind. Suddenly, who slept where didn't matter as much as putting some distance between myself and Leo. He sighed.
It's no big deal. He sleeps with me when he spends the night.
No wonder I had such a hard time getting him to sleep in his room. I wanted to glare, but it took too damned much energy. Leo opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. It's fine. Now that I know you're involved in his life, we can discuss things like potty training and bedtime routines. Every muscle in my body protested as I stood. I'll take the master bedroom. Can I borrow a pair of sweats? I'd love a shower.
Your clothes are still here.
You kept them all this time? I couldn't decide how I felt about that. On one hand, it was endearing. On the other, it made no sense. He'd avoided me for an entire year, but kept my clothes in his closet?
I couldn't bring myself to throw away your toothbrush and girly lotion either.
He scratched his rock-hard abs, flashing me his navel in the process. I'd always been a sucker for the dark line of hair that started at his belly button and disappeared beneath his low-slung PJ pants. Happy trail, indeed.
Keep looking at me like that and we'll end up sharing a bed.
Leo winked. I jerked my head up. I huffed. I left in such a hurry I didn't grab my purse or Gunner's diaper bag. He's going to need...
He has some clothes, toys, and diapers here.
Leo set his hands on my shoulders.
I'll get whatever you need from your place as soon as you're out of the shower.
My heart skidded to a halt at the thought of him leaving me and Gunner alone in his condo. Don't go tonight. We'll be fine until tomorrow.
Doll, you're safe here. We're 4 stories off the ground. No one is coming in my windows. You have to have the code or call to get inside the first floor. Even if someone slipped inside the building, they'd have to get through my security system. Not to mention, the 3 poodle tiers will go nuts if anyone besides the dog walker comes to the door.
We'll be okay. The stalker won't come here. That sounded well and good, but I'd passed the point of rational thought. You can't go to my house. What if the stalker is still there? There could be reporters.
I'll be back in 20 minutes tops.
He drew me closer and pressed his forehead to mine.
No one will see me. I'll park by Mrs. Simmons' place and go in through the back.
I swallowed past the emotions clogging my throat and nodded.
You're trembling.
Leo slid his hands down my arms.
Forget it. I'm not leaving you. I'll have Stuart or one of Marco's guys take care of it.
Thanks. I pressed my lips together, stiffened my spine, and pulled away from him. He cocked his head.
You don't have to do that, you know.
What? Leo motioned in my general direction.
Pretend you're made of steel.
Chapter 8. Leo. Sitting in the hall while the woman I loved sobbed in the shower was absolute torture. Over the past year, I'd experienced more than my fair share of frustration, helplessness, and wounded pride, but this topped it all. I pressed my hand to the door, closed my eyes, and whispered a prayer to the Virgin Mary for Dahlia. She might not have wanted my help, but she had it, and I didn't give a rat's ass who had a problem with it. Guard her. I pointed from the dogs to the bathroom. Fifi, Cupcake, and Eugene sat up and swiveled their heads between me and the door, but they stayed put. I poked my head into the guest room to check on my son. Gunner slept on his stomach with his thumb in his mouth. My rage threatened to bubble over when I thought about what could have happened to them. It took a sick man to threaten a woman and child. That Dahlia stalker had gotten so close to her and our boy was unacceptable. I won't let it happen again. I'll put the bastard in the ground, if that's what it takes. Easing from the room, I pulled my cell from my pocket. Marco answered on the 3rd ring, but I could barely hear him over a crying baby. Leo, man, this better be an emergency. You woke Renata. I need your help. 1 sec. He spoke to someone else in the room, probably Nico, and the wailing grew softer. What's up? I drew a deep breath and told him everything I knew about the situation. Dahlia and Gunner are safe. They're staying with me tonight. He sighed the sort of sigh that told me I wasn't going to like what he was about to say. I'm sorry, but you know I can't get involved in this. Can't or won't. I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. This is my family you're talking about. What would you do if some psychopath threatened to hurt Nico and Renata? I feel you, man, I do. He lowered his voice. But I can't put security on the governor's daughter, and if Calhoun's guy hasn't found anything on the stalker, what makes you think I can? I'm not asking you to find him. He'll out himself soon enough. I bowed my head and prayed for the right words to make him change his mind. The guy came in through Gunner's window. Dahl saw footprints next to his crib. Damn. I'm desperate. Anything could have happened to them tonight. One favor is all I'm asking. For my son. Are you finally going to tell the family he's yours? A year and a half before, I'd screwed up. In a fit of anger, I'd let it slip to Marco about Gunnar. Since then, he'd hammered me about mine and Dahlia's decision to keep the boy's paternity a secret. I need to speak to Dahlia first, preferably when she's not terrified. How can I help? My chest tightened. I need one bodyguard, a shadow to keep an eye on them when I can't. This psycho broke into her house. He's close. It won't be long before he tries something else. The media frenzy around Dahlia complicates things. I'd rather not out one of my guys. It jeopardizes their ability to do their jobs. I get that. What about Stewart? Can you put someone else on Ma for the time being? Good idea. His tone softened. We aren't due back in Palermo for another week. I'll have him shadow Dahlia and Gunnar when you're not home until then. A week could work. I have a feeling the stalker will come at her again sooner rather than later. From what she's told me, the guy's getting desperate. Desperate means sloppy. Be careful. Will do. Thanks for this. It means a lot to me. Don't mention it. He huffed out a laugh. Figuratively and literally. I won't. Any chance you can send Stewart to Dahlia's place in Marigny to pick up her purse and Gunnar's diaper bag? She freaked out when I tried to leave earlier. Text me the address and a list of what they need. Marco remained silent for a long moment before he said, Something about this makes no sense. If the guy was out to hurt her and Gunnar, why didn't he? He had access to both of them. Now that the adrenaline had faded, and I could think straight, the situation did seem odd. You're right. It could have been a scare tactic. But to what end? No clue, bro. Marco sighed. I should have sent someone with her today. We protect our women. It's the first rule of this family. I understand. You're trying to keep me and the rest of us away from the mob. You're not making it easy on me. The pics of the two of you playing tonsil hockey will make it to Italy if Calhoun wins the election. Other families will think you have an in with the new president of the United States. I hadn't thought of it like that. Marco was doing his damnedest to break ties with the Cosa Nostra. If the other members of the Fratellanza thought he had an in with the president, they'd never agree to let him out. In fact, they'd likely drag us all back into the fold, whether we wanted it or not. Marco had continued talking, but I'd missed most of what he'd said. Stewart is one thing. Everyone knows he works for Ma. My direct involvement is a different matter entirely. Right. Sorry, bro. I don't want to see you end up like... He hesitated, but it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out he was worried I'd end up like him. God only knew what Marco had done, or ordered others to do since taking over as capo. This is the only thing I'll ask of you. I swear it on my life. The weight of my words sat heavy on my shoulders. It had better be. He cleared his throat. A favor here and a favor there, and before you realize it, you're up to your ass in the business again. That's the last thing I want. And on that note, time to change the subject. By the way, Maggie guilted me into spending some time with Gabe. What do you say to getting the rest of our knucklehead brothers out on the water one day this week? Fishing and beer? As if you have to ask. Marco sounded like his old goofball self for the first time in over a year. I'd miss this side of him. Great. I'll touch base with Enzo and Dante and let you know when. So, the sound of a door closing came over the line and Marco whispered, A little unsolicited advice? Do I have a choice? I deadpanned, but in all honesty, I'd take all the fucking advice I could get. Leak a fake location and let Stewart take care of it. He chuckled. If I were you, I'd pack her and the kid up and get out of town. Go to the bayou or the mountains or Timbuk freaking too. Anywhere, as long as there's no internet and spotty cell reception. Is he kidding? And what? Hold her hostage? There are other potential benefits to holding up with Dahlia for a week. Judging by the tone of his voice, he'd wiggled his brows when he'd spoken, or at least grinned like a jackass. I'm not dragging her and my son to the middle of nowhere in hope she'll fall in love with me. Hey, it worked for me. I never would have gotten my shit together with Nico if we hadn't gone to the bayou. I pinched the bridge of my nose. The swamp is no place for a 2-year-old. Besides, I want to be the one to catch this asshole. I'll make sure he knows where to find her and be waiting when he shows up. You're planning to use me as bait? Dahlia whispered from behind me. I turned and met her swollen red eyes, and my heart screeched to a stop. Hey, Marco, I need to run. Dahlia hung her head. I'd never put you in danger. My brother continued to talk, but I disconnected the call. Marco and I were discussing leaking a fake location. He suggested we get out of town, but it'll seem strange if you're not photographed in New Orleans.
Right. Like I said, you're planning to use me as bait.
I hadn't thought this through enough to come up with a solid plan. Or we find a decoy. Either way, I arranged security for you.
Mob security?
Her eyes widened. Yes, sort of. Damn it. No, this has nothing to do with the Cosa Nostra. It's between me and Marco. He agreed to put Stewart on you and Gunner for a week. Her frown deepened. You won't even know he's there.
I don't like it.
She pulled her robe tighter. Dahlia had more than enough on her mind, without me adding to it. However, that didn't change the fact she was in danger, and we needed a rock-solid plan. You said it yourself. The stalker is close by. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had time to drop the latest letter in your mailbox. The color drained from her face and her shoulders sagged.
You're right. And if I have to have a bodyguard, Stewart is a good choice. He seems normal.
I knew what she meant, but I quirked a brow anyway. My best shot at easing her stress was to keep her talking and, with any luck, getting her laughing. Define normal. She made a circling motion with her hand.
You know, less like a muscle-bound bruiser.
What do you have against muscular men? I folded my arms, making sure to flex my biceps in the process.
Nothing, it's just...
Dahlia stiffened, met my eyes, and dropped her gaze to my arms. Seeming to catch on to the fact I was joking with her, she smiled. Well, I balled my hands and execute the quintessential bodybuilder pose. Slight squat, fists 4 inches apart in front of my junk, chest, biceps, and shoulders flexed. I finished it off by scrunching my face and grunting.
Nothing. I have nothing against muscles.
Dahlia laughed, and my world righted itself. Now that we have that settled, I nodded to the kitchen. Hungry?
Not really.
Not even for the world's most outstanding breakfast food? She perked up.
Do you have strawberries?
Please, for the love of everything good and holy, tell me they haven't spoiled. I gave her an exaggerated smirk. Do I have strawberries?
I'd love some French toast.
I ran through my mental list of Dahlia's other favorites. How about some mimosas for the hot Momosa? Dahlia's face fell as if I'd heard her. What the hell did I do to cause that look in her eyes? Are you sure you're okay?
Sorry, I'm tired and overly emotional.
She waved her hand.
It's just... that phrase reminded me of when Gunner was tiny.
Shit. How do I respond to that? Apologize? Before I could puzzle it out, she walked into the living room. Dahlia curled up on her side of the sofa and stared out the windows at the city lights.
I've always loved it here, but a 4th-floor condo with a rooftop deck isn't exactly toddler-friendly.
I seated myself on the ottoman in front of her. The position was close enough to reach out and touch her, but not too close. I didn't want her to feel caged, or worse, like I was coming on to her. I had the place baby-proofed months ago. She glanced around the room and frowned.
Still, I can't stay here.
Before I could reply, her phone rang. Dahlia pulled the cell from the robe pocket, glanced at the screen, and furrowed her brow.
It's Harrison.
Just my luck. She'd managed to remember her damned phone. Answer it. She turned her body away from me.
Hi, Harry.
Harrison was bad enough, but Harry? The nickname made me want to vomit. I went into the kitchen to give her the illusion of privacy in the large open concept room.
Sorry about that. I had no idea you were in New Orleans, let alone stopping by.
Her voice shook.
Someone broke into my house. I think it was my stalker.
Stopping by at this hour? What the fuck? I pulled a pan down from the rack, set it on the stove, and pretended to be too busy to eavesdrop.
I'm okay.
Dahlia sighed and glanced at me.
Where am I?
Rather than helping her come up with an alibi, I turned to the fridge and pulled out the butter, eggs, and a pint of berries.
I'm staying with a friend tonight.
She frowned.
No, it's okay. I don't want to wake Gunner.
The longer she spoke to Harrison fucking Merriweather, the more it sounded like she was lying to a significant other, and the more my blood boiled. She'd said the douchebag had proposed marriage, but I didn't recall her telling me she turned him down, only that they were just friends. They sure as hell don't sound like just friends.
Sure, tomorrow sounds great.
She paused, glanced at me, and looked away just as quickly.
But I'll have Gunnar with me. Christina quit.
I'll keep an eye on him tomorrow. I made sure to speak loud enough that politician Kendall could hear me. Dahlia's mouth fell open.
That? Oh, that was Leo.
Resisting the urge to smirk, I cracked several eggs into a bowl. Fuck him. I bet he doesn't know French toast is her favorite comfort food, let alone how to make it exactly the way she likes it. By the time Dahlia finished the call, the French toast was ready. We ate in an uncomfortable silence, or I did, anyway. Dahlia seemed focused on eating. Actually, she seemed too focused. She had a lot going on. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility that she was thinking about Harrison or her dad or the stalker. Or maybe, just maybe, she was thinking about me. Whatever the case, I missed the freaky, almost psychic connection we used to share.
This is exactly what I needed.
Dahlia swirled her last bite of French toast through the syrup before popping it into her mouth. The satisfied noise she made went straight to my cock. But I did my best to ignore it. It had been a long day and longer night. Neither of us were in any shape to get physical. Besides, if I had my way, I'd spend the rest of my life doing anything and everything I could to hear all of her moans and sighs.
How do you do it?
She sat back and rested her hands on her belly like she had when she'd been pregnant with Gunnar, minus the baby bump, of course. I took her plate to the sink. Do what?
Achieve the perfect bread-to-berry ratio. It's like you know exactly how many strawberries to add to each piece of bread.
She polished off her chamomile tea and flashed me a drowsy smile. I'm just that good.
Mm-hmm.
Between the purr in her voice and the hint of a grin, I couldn't tell if she was flirting or too tired to keep the wall up between us. Not that it mattered. Not yet, anyway. Let's get you to bed, sweetheart. Chapter 9. Leo. My plan was to take care of the little guy so Dahlia could sleep in. After what she'd gone through the previous night, she needed to take it easy. If she slept through the plan she'd made with Harrison fucking Merriweather, all the better. I'd replayed her half of the conversation with Harry a dozen times. She'd seemed surprised he was in town. Had he just happened to make an unexpected visit on the same night someone broke into her house? Coincidence? I think not. I'd bet my left nut he had something to do with the stalker. In fact, I wouldn't put it past him to have written the letters himself to scare her into his spray-tanned arms.
Mama!
Gunnar's frightened voice and subsequent cries snapped me back to reality. I set my coffee on the kitchen counter and hurried toward the guest room.
Mama!
The toddler sat in the center of the bed surrounded by poodles. His dark curls stood up in gravity-defying spikes, and his face was red and soggy from crying. I walked into the room and reached for him, but stopped when he shrank from me. Hey, it's okay. Your mom is sleeping in the other room.
What? Mama?
He hiccuped between each word. Easing down beside him, I lowered my voice in hopes he'd do the same. How about some scrambled eggs and cartoons?
Waffles?
He wiped the snot from his nose and rubbed his hand on Fifi. I added bathing the dogs to my growing to-do list. Waffles it is. Gunnar sighed, untangled his legs from the covers, and launched himself at me. 2 seconds after impact, I realized I had a problem. Moisture had soaked through my t-shirt, the toddler, and the bed. The freaking diaper had leaked. Let's get you cleaned up, little man. He scrunched his face.
I peed.
I see that. Chuckling, I lifted him into my arms and carried him to the guest bathroom. He took one look at the walk-in shower and shook his head.
Tub.
I don't have a tub. He cocked his head.
Mama takes showers.
Yes, she does. It had to be a major sin to think about Dahlia wet and naked with our child in my arms, but my brain went there before I could stop it. What do you say? Want to try it out? He gave me a dubious look, but nodded. After stripping him out of the 10-pound diaper and piss-soaked pajamas, I reached in and started the water without thinking. The last time I'd used the shower was to bathe the dogs, and, of course, I'd forgotten to hang the detachable nozzle back up. The damn thing wiggled and whirled like an angry snake. Thankfully, the shower enclosure was the size of a walk-in closet, and the water didn't soak the floor. Gunnar backed away from me, shaking his head.
Tub, please.
I turned the water pressure down. It's better now. Nothing to be afraid of. Tub. He folded his arms. I don't have a tub. It occurred to me I was arguing with a 2.5-year-old and losing. Give it a try. Gunnar pursed his lips. You try. Why the hell not? I stood, pulled my t-shirt over my head, and slipped out of my PJ pants. Come in with me. Gunnar cracked up laughing. You have undies on. They need washing too. I held my hand out to him. He shrugged and walked into the shower. Why hell not? Wincing, I stepped into the shower. Dahlia's going to kill me. 10 minutes later, Gunnar and I entered the kitchen squeaky clean and wearing dry clothes. I parked him on the kitchen floor with a sack of his favorite toys. Gunnar clapped his hands and did a little dance before dumping everything on the tile. Grinning like an idiot, I gathered the ingredients to make breakfast, including the ancient waffle maker. I couldn't remember where it had come from, or the last time I'd used it. Mama! Gunnar grinned like the Cheshire Cat. Good morning, sunshine. Dahlia kissed the top of his head on the way to the coffee, but stopped short when she spotted the waffle maker. I was wondering where that went. I turned my kitchen inside out looking for it. I didn't realize you'd left it here. Memories of making waffles with her filled my mind. We'd started out strong, but gotten distracted making out and burned them beyond all recognition. How could I have forgotten? Are you okay? She cocked her head. I waved her off. Yeah, just zoned out there for a minute. How's the ankle? Sore, but the swelling is down. Is it okay if I borrow an ace bandage? Take whatever you need. I nodded toward the boy. Gunnar and I had a shower. Looks like I'm going to need to do laundry and buy some more sheets. Uh-oh. She made a sour face. Did it soak through to the mattress? Doubt it. I put an industrial-strength liner on it when Marco was in college. He crashed here a lot back then. Didn't want the bed to get an STD. STD? Gunnar repeated the acronym several times. Dahlia frowned. Shit. Not STD, STP. They're a rock band from before you were born. STP? His brows rose. That's right. Rather than opening my mouth and risk more bad words falling out, I focused on making the damned waffles. Do you have plans today? Are you sure you're up for babysitting this afternoon? Dahlia sat at the kitchen table and sipped her coffee. It's not babysitting. I glanced to the little guy and lowered my voice. When it's my own son. Her expression softened. You know what I mean. Are you sure you have time? I needed to swing by my hotel, grab some groceries, and make a stop at the Marchionni Corporation. However, I didn't want my son anywhere near Harrison Merriweather. Nothing that can't wait until later, or tomorrow, if you're uncomfortable staying here alone for a couple of hours. Sorry I overreacted last night. We'll be fine here while you're gone. I should pick up some kid-friendly food. Make a list of anything else you need while I finish breakfast. Sure, but I'm hoping we'll be out of your hair in a day or two. She walked to the junk drawer and pulled out a pen and paper. For the first time in my life, I couldn't make heads or tails of her behavior. Why would she make a list if she was leaving? You're welcome to stay. I don't think that's a good idea. Dahlia glanced between Gunnar and me. But I'll take you up on your offer to have Stuart keep an eye on us until we leave. I had about 1,000,000 questions, but bit my tongue. I'd have plenty of time to ask them when we were alone, and preferably after she'd had her coffee. However, there was one I couldn't resist asking. Any idea where you'll go? She met my gaze. Harrison offered his place in Baton Rouge. I turned my back to her so she couldn't see my expression. Sounds downright cozy. He's hardly ever in town. My father has him working on the campaign nonstop. She sighed. I'm sorry, Leo. A lot has happened in the past year. Things changed. You're an adult, capable of making your own mistakes. Just make sure you have security there. I set a plateful of waffles on the table. Shouldn't you be getting dressed? You don't want to be late for Prince Charming. Prince Charming! Gunnar giggled and climbed into his chair. That's right, buddy. Prince Charming. I threw my head back and laughed. Be nice, both of you? Dahlia seemed to struggle between laughing and bursting into tears, snagged a waffle, and retreated down the hall. I understood her confusion. Hell, I was right there with her, but that didn't mean I was going to let her go without a fight. As long as I kept her smiling, we could work through anything. All I had to do was remind her we belonged together. Harrison fucking Merriweather can kiss my Sicilian ass.
Chapter 10. Dahlia. The men in my life have lost their minds. Every flippin' last one of them. Even Gunnar. I had no idea when it had happened. It seemed like an all-of-a-sudden kind of thing. But the testosterone-induced insanity could have been lurking under the surface for quite some time. Like mold in a washing machine. An occasional whiff of something sour until it hit critical mass, and the stench became overwhelming. All I knew for sure was I needed to get a handle on the situation before one or all of them passed the point of no return. The little guy would be fine once things settled. My father would return to normal once the media calmed down. Robert would fall back in line eventually. Leo and Harry were a different story altogether. I planned to set the record straight with Harrison at brunch. Not that I should have to. I'd made my feelings or lack thereof known for months. Of course, that hadn't stopped him from proposing a made-for-the-cameras political marriage. Despite what I'd told Leo, I knew it'd be a very bad idea to move in with Harrison. Living there had more strings attached than a dozen marionettes. We were friends, nothing more. Leo was complicated. I'd loved him my entire adult life, and despite our separation, that hadn't changed. Unfortunately, the circumstances that had kept us apart hadn't changed either. Not really. The buzzer rang, alerting me that someone was at the door. Stuart was on time, but I was running late. I took one last look in the mirror and frowned. In the year I'd known Harrison, he'd never seen me without makeup. Hell, he'd never seen me in jeans and a t-shirt. Our relationship, if you could call it that, had consisted of work, campaign events, and meals with my father and Robert. Like it or not, he's going to meet the real me today. I tucked my ponytail under my ball cap, grabbed my purse, and hurried into the front room. Gunnar glanced up, took in my purse and shoes. I braced myself for a million questions and possible tantrum, but he turned his attention back to his miniature cars. At least one of us is comfortable here. Leo, Stuart, and a beautiful dark-haired woman stood in the kitchen whispering, but stopped when they saw me. My mind immediately flashed back to the hundreds of mob-related conversations I'd walked in on during my time with Leo. Sorry to interrupt. I heard the buzzer. Leo forced a smile. For a man who claimed to be out of the mafia, he sure as hell looked like he was up to something shady.
We're discussing a plan to get you out of the building.
The woman gave me a once-over and shook her head.
It won't work. I'm a foot shorter and 20 pounds heavier than her. It'll work.
Stuart held out his hand. The woman rolled her eyes, removed her hoodie, and pulled her hot pink t-shirt over her head. Thankfully, she wore a black thermal top beneath it, but the entire situation bugged me. Who was this woman, and why was she so comfortable here?
Put this on. Hide the one you're wearing in your bag.
Stuart tossed the shirt at me. I might have been slow on the uptake, but I wasn't stupid. The paparazzi had seen her enter wearing the hideous color. Let me guess. You're my decoy. I'm Beth, Stuart's wife. She smiled. And, yes, I'll be your stunt double this morning. Leo gave her a sideways hug, stole the cap from her head, and ruffled her hair.
She's also my dog walker and quasi-personal assistant.
That's nice. I stormed down the hall to change shirts. I'd only just met Beth and I didn't like her. Not at all. Which was ridiculous. It made 0 sense, but I was jealous. And not just a little bit. This was insert myself between the hussy and claim my man like a cave woman jealous.
You okay?
Leo walked into the bedroom without knocking and gawked at my bra-covered breasts. I should have covered them or turned my back. Instead, I took my sweet time dressing. Yep. He ran his hand over the back of his neck.
It's going to be okay. We're all going to leave together. You and Stuart will go one way. Beth and I will take Gunnar and the dogs the other. I'm counting on them to make enough noise to create confusion.
Who? The dogs or the reporters? I tucked the shirt into my jeans and took a step toward him.
Both.
He lifted his hand as if to touch me, but stopped short.
Getting you back into the building will be easier. The shop next door opens at noon today. They have a delivery entrance and access to the fire escape. From there, it's 4 flights of stairs and a short jump to my deck.
I'm sorry I've caused you so much drama. I stood close enough to smell the soap and aftershave on his skin. It took every ounce of my willpower to keep my hands to myself.
Stop apologizing. Dodging the paparazzi is a small price to pay for time with you and Gunnar.
Leo reached for me again. Only this time he didn't drop his hand. He cupped my face and ran his thumb over my cheek.
Don't go to Baton Rouge.
Leo. Part of me wanted to stay, but I needed time and space to think things through. I couldn't do that with either man. I wanted to go home. But between Robert's threats and the stalker, that wasn't possible.
I know. I hurt you. It's too soon.
He kissed my brow.
But promise me I can see you and the little guy on Christmas.
Spending the holiday with my family meant a stuffy dinner at the governor's mansion. On the other hand, the Marchionnis started celebrating with the traditional feast of the 7 fishes on Christmas Eve, partied through New Year's Day, and didn't stop until the Feast of the Epiphany. It would be a blast, but it was out of the question. They didn't know about Gunnar. My family will be expecting us. I absolutely hated how complicated everything in my life had become.
Ma's planning to host everyone in Comiso this year.
You want us to go to Sicily? I understood why Evelyn would want the Marchionnis in Italy for the holidays. It could very well be Leo's father's last Christmas.
That would be incredible, but no. I thought we could celebrate here, just the 3 of us.
My heart broke for him, for our son, and a little for myself. I followed him to the front room. We could do breakfast and open presents before I go to my folks. Or, if I'm in Baton Rouge, I could bring Gunnar to visit you on Christmas Eve.
Sure, that sounds great. You should go before you're late.
I'm sorry. It's just so
Complicated?
Leo smiled, but I knew his expression was a lie. He handed me Beth's hoodie before turning to Gunnar.
Let's get your jacket on, little man.
We go bye-bye?
He glanced between the adults. Kneeling in front of him, I helped him with his coat. You're going for a walk with Leo and the dogs. I have a meeting, but I'll be back soon, okay? Gunnar ran to Leo and held up his arms.
Up.
My vision blurred as Leo settled Gunnar on his shoulders. Father and son wore expressions of pure joy, and there I stood on the outside looking in. Stuart turned to me.
We'll give them a minute or 2 head start.
Sure. I had serious doubts the plan would work, not to mention second thoughts about going at all. Beth clicked the leashes on the poodles and slid on an enormous pair of sunglasses.
Ready?
As ready as I'm going to be. Leo's grin faded.
Doll, we've got this. They'll be too busy snapping pictures of me and Beth.
It's not about the reporters. My voice cracked. He furrowed his brow.
Then what is it?
Gunnar wanted no part of whatever was happening between the adults in the room. He grabbed Leo's ears and used them like reins to steer his noble steed back toward the door.
Let's go, now.
We'll talk later. I motioned for him to leave. Stuart and Beth exchanged glances.
Are you sure?
Still frowning, Leo did a weird half-gallop, half-dance around the room, which sent the little one into a fit of laughter. Squaring my shoulders, I said, "Yes, let's do this." The plan went off without a hitch. The paparazzi snapped pictures and shouted questions at Leo and Beth. I hated that Gunnar was in the middle of the circus, but he didn't seem upset. If anything, he seemed to enjoy the chaos. I looped my arm with Stuart's and hurried in the other direction. I hate this.
It's temporary. We're going to catch the guy who's harassing you.
I arrived to the restaurant 15 minutes late. Not great, but nothing out of the ordinary for me. Since the reporters started circling, I hadn't made it to a single meeting on time. I'll text you when I'm ready to go. I didn't bother to check the mirror. I knew I looked an absolute wreck. The funny thing was, I couldn't bring myself to care. All I wanted to do was get this over with and get back home. Home? To Leo's. I wanted to get back to Leo's. Stuart scanned the area before turning to me.
I'll park and keep an eye on the door in case there's any trouble.
Thanks. I walked into the crowded bistro and spotted Harrison sitting at a table in the front window. He met my gaze and smiled, his campaign event smile, convincing but fake. I'm sorry I'm late. I slid into the chair that put my back to the glass. The paparazzi aren't giving up. Leaning close, he hissed.
What did you think would happen after that kiss?
I'd expected his tone, but I wasn't in the mood to deal with one more thing. I'd rather not discuss it.
That makes two of us.
He slid a key across the table.
Do you need any help moving your things?
I appreciate the offer, but I can't move in with you.
Of course you can.
He motioned for the waiter. My nerves made the waffle I'd eaten feel like a 10-pound weight in my stomach. Don't. I'm not staying. He sighed and softened his tone.
We need to talk, and we can't stay here without ordering something.
I can't marry you. There. Short, sweet, and to the point. I'd told him as much before, but for whatever reason he'd chosen to ignore me. He rested his hand on mine.
You've been through a lot in the last 24 hours. Now isn't the time to make any rash decisions.
This isn't a rash decision. I gave you my answer the night you proposed. I sat back and folded my arms. Harry turned to the waiter.
I'll have the smoked salmon Benedict, and she'll have the egg white Florentine.
Actually, nothing for me. I forced a smile.
Make that 2 cafe au laits.
He handed the confused server the menus and turned back to me. His expression had gone from irritated to wounded.
Is this about Leo Marchionni?
I told you I didn't want to marry you before I saw Leo again. Until that moment, I wouldn't have thought it possible my rejection had actually hurt him. His career, yes, but his feelings, no. I'm not in love with you.
Are you in love with Leo?
Harry rested his elbows on the table and clasped his hands. It would have been so easy to lie to him, to tell him what he wanted to hear, but I couldn't bring myself to deny my feelings. Part of me will always love him, but this isn't an either-or situation. I'm not picking him over you or vice versa.
Then, may I ask why you're refusing me?
I just told you why. I don't want either of us to end up cold and bitter in a loveless marriage, Harrison. He gave me a patient smile.
Over the previous year, we've become good friends. Dare I say we're fond of one another?
I recognized the trap he'd set, but nodded.
People in our world don't marry for love. It's a bonus when it's there, but it's not necessary. We're already ahead of the curve starting as friends. Who's to say we won't fall in love in time?
Me? I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm sorry. I can't marry someone in the hopes I'll love them someday. He spoke through gritted teeth.
We can make it work. Think about what this marriage would do for both of our families.
Goodbye, Harry. I stood. He grabbed my hand hard enough to crush my knuckles.
I'm not asking you to live a lie. We aren't your parents, Dahlia.
What the heck is that supposed to mean? I couldn't believe he'd thrown that in my face. My parents had exactly the kind of relationship Harrison had proposed. My dad handled it well enough. My mom, not so much.
You will do this, because you always do what's best for your father.
Not this time. I snatched my hand back.
You're going to regret this.
Rubbing my fingers, I said, "The only thing I regret is coming here instead of telling you what I had to say over the phone." People turned and stared, but I didn't care. He'd not only crossed the line, he'd erased it. Harrison plastered on a fake smile and lowered his voice.
Sit down. You're causing a scene.
"We're done here." I marched outside. The Hawaiian shirt-clad reporter that had been waiting for me outside my house lowered his camera and gave me a quick salute. For all our careful planning, one paparazzo had caught on. Son of a bitch. Can this day get any worse?
Chapter 11. Leo. I'd lost feeling in my ears, but Gunner's laughter made it all worthwhile. Besides, none was an improvement over the pain. Who knew 2-year-olds had such strong grips? The gaggle of reporters followed a few feet behind us. One snapped picture after picture, while 2 shouted questions. As I'd predicted, Fifi, Cupcake, and Eugene went ballistic. The 3 poodle tears barked so ferociously their front legs came off the ground with each yip. Big dogs might have bulk, but I'd wrestle with a freaking labradoodle any day of the week before I'd take on a pissed-off poodle. The paparazzi asked the same questions as they had the day before. "Dahlia, does the governor know you're involved with a suspected mobster? Did you call it quits with Harrison? Any news about your stalker?" I'd tuned them out until the blonde female asked,
"Leo, Gunner looks a lot like you. Would you like to make a statement?" That one's kind of hard to ignore. Beth tightened her grip on the leashes and glanced from me to the boy on my shoulders. The resemblance is hard to miss.
"Is it? I hadn't noticed." I glanced over my shoulder to make sure Dahlia and Stewart had made a clean getaway. "Ready to get rid of the paparazzi?"
More than ready.
She removed her sunglasses and turned to face the reporters. The photographer lowered his camera and let loose a string of curses. The blonde put him to shame with the colorful words coming out of her mouth. She might have looked like Polly-freaking Sunshine, but she had a not-safe-for-prime-time vocabulary.
Language.
Beth planted her hands on her hips and stared them down.
You should all be ashamed of yourselves. There's a child present.
Certain types of people thrived on conflict. As a general rule, it was better not to engage the internet trolls and gossip reporters of the world. However, Beth hadn't gotten the memo, nor had the poodles. The blonde paparazzi flashed a predatory smile.
A child that has no father named on his birth certificate.
I'd had enough, but there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. I couldn't lay into the blonde with Gunner on my shoulders, nor could I set the record straight without talking to Dahlia first. "Let's go, Beth." The women continued their staring contest. I turned and walked back toward the condo. She'd catch up to me, or she wouldn't. I didn't care either way. I had things to do. Dahlia, turning me down for Christmas, had given me an idea. A rather brilliant one, in fact. The holidays were all about family. What better way to show her we could be a family than to take part in some of my favorite traditions? Beth jogged to my side.
Want me to take the dogs on their usual route, or do you want company?
I gave her side-eye. That depends. Are you going to ask me any more questions I can't answer? Beth's eyes widened before she shook her head.
Nope, it's none of my business, but congrats. He's a lucky kid.
I'm lucky. Gunner hugged my head, half blinding me in the process. We both are. Love you, little man. I pretended to gnaw on his leg and was rewarded with peals of laughter. What do you want Santa to bring you for Christmas? Fish, he said without a moment's hesitation. I whispered to the mother of 2 rambunctious boys. Can 2-year-olds have fish? Beth tugged on Gunner's pant leg.
Do you want a fish to eat or a pet?
To pet it. He ran his hands over my hair as if to demonstrate.
In the grand scheme of things, fish aren't so bad. He could have asked for drums or a snake.
She gave me a sly smile.
Drums and snake, too.
He leaned forward and turned my head until he met my gaze.
Okay, Leo?
Judging by Beth's laughter, she'd set me up for that one. Sure, buddy. We'll write a letter to Santa when we get home.
Love you, Leo.
He hugged me again.
Gah.
Beth shook her head and followed us back to my building.
You two are enough to make me wish Stuart hadn't gotten a vasectomy.
I winced for the sake of the other man's balls and opened the door for her. Too much information. Back at my place, I pulled Gunnar from my shoulders and planted him at the table with a box of crayons, pencils, and paper. Do you want me to write the words?
I write it.
Gunnar managed to find the only marker in the box and wrapped all 5 fingers around like a small club. He scribbled a black blob on the paper, frowned, and held the marker out to Beth.
Help, please.
I took advantage of his distraction to make a couple of calls to set my plan in motion. I ordered cookies from a local bakery and a turkey dinner from my hotel's restaurant. Within the hour, the unused Christmas decorations at Marchionni Corp. would be delivered to the condo. I might not have mob connections, but I could still get shit done. Now all I need is a tree. I dialed Dante, my only remaining single brother. The rest would undoubtedly have their hands full with their wives and children. He answered on the second ring.
Hey, bro, what's up?
I need a favor. Walking out of the room so Gunnar wouldn't overhear, I whispered, Any chance you could help me get a Christmas tree today? Dante laughed. It's not complicated. You go to the lot, pick one out, and drag it home. I can't leave. I'm watching Dahlia's son. The line went quiet. D, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
He sucked in a breath. I heard about the trouble she's having. Are her and the kid with you permanently? If I have it my way, yes.
Is that a good idea?
I'd had about all I could take with invasive questions for one day. It's a very good idea. So good, in fact, I want to surprise them with a fucking tree. Are you going to help me or not? Another one bites the dust. Dante chuckled. Looks like I'm the last Marchionni brother standing. Pinching the bridge of my nose, I said, I'm working on it, but I have a long way to go before you need to start planning my bachelor party.
How big?
What the hell is he talking about? Come again?
What size tree are we talking?
I'd never bothered to put up a tree at my place because my brothers and I crashed at my folks over the holidays. But given the rate they were procreating, that would be difficult. Tall enough to impress a 2-year-old?
Dude, I'm pretty sure a branch with a star and lights on it would impress a toddler.
He muttered something under his breath.
I'll figure it out. Be there in a couple hours.
The front door opened, but the dogs remained blessedly quiet. Since their walker was already in the kitchen with Gunnar, it had to be Dahlia and Stuart. Thanks. Get a stand, too. I needed to get off the phone and find out what had happened with Harrison. And a goldfish.
Are you serious?
Out of the 3 choices Gunnar had given me, I'd pick a fish over a drum or snake any freaking day of the year. The little one asked for a fish for Christmas. Dante groaned. Anything else while I'm playing personal shopper? Just the tree, the fish, and whatever else I need to keep it alive. I disconnected the call and walked back into the kitchen.
Mama, look.
Gunnar held up a stack of papers, each with 1 or 2 scribbled crayon marks.
Wow, those are beautiful.
Dahlia smiled, but between her tight jaw and stiff posture, I had a feeling brunch hadn't gone well. The little guy placed the pages side by side on the table.
This one is a drum, this one is a snake, this one is a fish. Interesting choices.
She glanced at me for the first time since she'd returned. He's writing his letter to Santa. I rested my hip against the counter and folded my arms. Beth gave Stuart a longing look that had the big guy shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He cleared his throat. We should get going. Dahlia, call me if you need to go out.
I will, and thanks again.
She all but collapsed into the chair beside Gunnar. I walked the couple to the front door, gave Stuart a sympathetic smile, and Beth a quick hug. Next time, I'll throw some steaks in the grill and make a party out of it. Stuart glanced past me to Dahlia, pressed his lips into a thin line, and shook his head. Not that I had any doubt about her mental state, but his gesture confirmed my suspicions. I wanted to know what the hell had happened, more than I wanted my next breath, but it wasn't the time to ask. Suddenly, a day full of Christmas traditions seemed like a very bad idea.
Mama, look.
Gunnar waved a drawing that resembled an inkblot test in front of Dahlia's face. Once again, she smiled.
That's great, baby. I'm not a baby.
He slammed his hands on the table and sent the crayons flying. Dahlia closed her eyes and pressed her hand to her temple. Okay, little man, that's enough. I'd never sounded so much like my dad, and I didn't quite know how I felt about it. Gunnar narrowed his eyes, and I found myself in an Old West-style stare-down, each of us waiting to see what the other would do. Screw this. I'm his father, not his best friend. I lifted him from the chair. We have a big day ahead of us, but first, it's nap time. No nap. He flung his head back against my cheek hard enough I saw stars. Tucking him under my arm like a sack of kicking, screaming potatoes, I headed down the hall. As if by magic, Gunnar calmed when we reached the bedroom. He rubbed his eyes and climbed into the queen-sized bed without prompting. Shiny blanket. I didn't get his fascination with the sleeping bag, but he loved the slick fabric. Have a good nap. He held out his arms to me. Hugs. How a tiny human could go from raging lunatic to the cutest thing in the world in a matter of seconds was beyond me. I gave him a quick kiss on the brow and a gentle squeeze. Sweet dreams. Gunnar mumbled something and rolled to his belly. I returned to the kitchen to find Dahlia standing at the window, staring out over the French Quarter rooftops. She glanced over her shoulder and gave me a tired smile. Thank you. He was asleep before I closed the door. I wanted to hold my arms out to her the way our son had done to me, but I doubted it would have the same effect. Want to talk about it? Harry didn't like what I had to say. She wrapped her arms around herself and turned away, even though he'd heard it all before. Standing behind her, I rested my hands on her shoulders. Why don't you relax while Gunnar's sleeping? We're going to have a busy afternoon. I could use a nap. She pulled away and took a few steps toward the hall. That she didn't ask about what I had up my sleeve worried me. The Dahlia I knew would have begged and pleaded for hints until she'd gotten every detail and utterly ruined the surprise. Dahlia spoke with her back to me. Leo? Yeah. What do you have planned? She turned and gave me a crooked grin that told me everything would be all right. Eventually.
This has been part 1 of Hot Mimosa, Bourbon Street Bad Boys Club, Book 4. Written by Kathryn M. Hearst. Narrated by Ava Lucas and Aaron Shedlock. Be sure to stay tuned for part 2. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please subscribe to Kathryn's channel where you can find more of her contemporary and paranormal romance novels.